here on November the 20th, it is World Children's Day, and it's also the 35th anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is the most ratified human rights treaty in the history of the world. And this day is set aside for children all over the world to be celebrated. And so we're going to be talking about our commitment to children here in our community. All right, so I'm saying hello, and then we're going to hear from Senator Lovely, and then we're going to hear about what the City of Salem is doing with Sarah Roy. We've got a UNICEF representative from New York coming, Krista Becker, who's going to tell you more about what a child-friendly community is. Then we have two speakers, Christy Udelis-Palma and Maddie Wegner from Minneapolis, who have been building a child-friendly community. And then we have two speakers from Wales to talk about what they are doing as one of the most embedded child-friendly communities in the world. And so then we'll have lunch, and then in the afternoon, you're invited to stay here to work in groups to figure out how we're going to advance this issue of being a child-friendly community, whether we're designated by UNICEF or not. We know that child-friendly communities are in over 500 communities in 40 countries, and that there are not very many in the United States. And as you see, there's none in New England. So we could be a real trendsetter for this. There are all kinds of benefits to protecting our children, makes them safer, better educated, healthier, happier, more rights respecting, that they're learning how to do democracy in action. The data proves that communities that invest in their children have better relationships with parents, teachers, and other adults, less crime, they have better relations with their peers, and having a very embedded future focus for children and telling them that they can use their agency and participation is a really important thing. And this is what we're going to do today. And so we're going to talk about this legacy of Salem for our Salem, our kids. And so today is the first step. We're having a conversation, right? You are all good partners to be here today. You're already invested, and we thank you for that. There are other partners in the community that certainly would like to join with us. And some are here in the community, some are in the state, the region, nationally and internationally. So there are all kinds of resources. On your table, you will find a list of resources that are available for you, and that's just a few of them. All right. So please talk to us. We're very happy to assist you. Let's talk, let's dream, and let's plan together to make our children's dreams come true. So I would like to now have the honor of introducing everybody's good friend in Salem, Senator Lovely.
Thank you, Yvonne. Yvonne and I go way back to here, to this university when it was a college, before it became a university. She was a professor, and that's how I got to know her. And I always tell the funny story, if it wasn't for Yvonne, I would never have passed statistics. See, I can't even say it. Statistics. Really wonderful professor, and we have been friends since, and comrades, partners in this work. So I'm really pleased to be here today as we celebrate World Children's Day and recognize the importance of how we treat our children, how the policy we make, how that treats our children. We have done a lot of really good work. We have a lot of work to do. And so I'm just really pleased to be here. You know, what is it? In 1989, when the Convention on the Rights of the Child was passed by the United Nations, and the United States is not a member. We're one of two, I believe, countries. How many? We're the only country. We're the only country now not to join this Convention on the Rights of the Child. So where are we starting? At the local level, right here in Salem. And I'm so proud to partner with Yvonne in this space, because we see, especially in the wake of a pandemic, you know, what this has done to our children. You know, they're our future, but we see so much dysregulation. I hear from parents all the time. I hear from educators. And what can we do as policymakers to be able to make positive change? And so I've had the really good fortune in my now almost 12 years in the Senate to chair the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities. It's actually become a really top policy area for me. And as a result of our work, we have filed, Yvonne and I, again as my partner, we filed every session a bill to establish a commission on the status of children and youth right here in our Commonwealth. And I have not been able to get that bill passed. People are very interested in it. I have a ton of co-sponsors, but I have not been able to get it over the finish line in several sessions. It's disheartening, it's disappointing, but it doesn't keep us from doing this work. And we filed again this session. It is in Senate Ways and Means, and I am working closely with the chair to see if we can get this to the finish line at the end of this session, which is just about 6 weeks away. And if we can't, I will refile it. We will continue to work on it and see if we can get this at the state level. But working at the local level is really paramount. So that's why I'm so glad that Salem is leading this here in our Commonwealth and what we can do. Because, again, children are our future. It's imperative that we listen to them. And what does this, the Convention on the Rights of the Child? It's led by children. It's actually the children are at the table leading these discussions. These are the very children that we want to be listening to. As you notice, there's 3 strikes, teacher strikes happening right now in Beverly, Marblehead, and Gloucester. And representing Beverly, there were about 80 educators, school counselors, school nurses, and children at the State House yesterday. And they were rallying out front on the State House steps. They came in to see me. We met in a hallway because my office wasn't big enough. We didn't have a big enough room, but they were okay with that. And we heard from them. But I heard from the children, and that's what matters. I want these educators to be compensated, especially paraprofessionals who need better resources and compensation to do their jobs. They're absolutely a necessary part of educating our children. And so I listen to them, and I listen to the children who are upset and sad that they're not in school. Beverly mom right here, Sarah, who's working here now for the city, right in this very space, in this area, sharing with me that her two children are home. What is costing you for childcare? And you said, I can afford it, but what about parents who can't? But this is where children matter. This is where we need to listen to our children and make sure that they feel safe, protected, and supported. So we're hopeful that strike, sorry to go off on a tangent, but hopefully those strikes will settle today, this week. We can get our kids back into school, and so that they feel protected. But they have a voice, and they used that voice yesterday on Beacon Hill, and I'm so proud that they did in that space. So we are here to, again, support all of you, all the work that you do. I hear from many of you. Please let us know as legislators how you feel about what the work that you're doing, because it helps shape our policy, and we need to hear from our residents. And again, I just want to say how proud I am to partner with Dr. Vissing in doing this work. We will continue to put one foot in front of the other and make a difference, but in your career, don't retire, please. Please don't go anywhere. That we will continue to really make some positive change. And I look forward to hearing from some of the speakers before I have to head off to the State House. So thank you, Dr. Vissing. Always proud to partner with you. Thank you, everyone.
It's so wonderful to have someone who is a big advocate for children and for the community at the state level. And let me introduce you to our advocate here on the local level of Sarah Roy. And I'll let her tell you about her, because some of you may not know her.
I always like to start with saying I'm a social worker and I'm a mother. So I think those are the two kind of main parts about my perspective that I bring to this conversation and to the work that we're doing. Previously, I served as a school adjustment counselor and a counseling director at Salem Academy, which is a 6th through 12th grade school here in Salem, serving just under 500 students. And prior to that, I worked as a clinician in residential treatment for several years. So I've always been working with at-risk adolescents and doing a lot of family outreach. And then COVID happened and our worlds fell apart and our systems had to be rebuilt as we were flying, right? And I just had this moment where I said, God, it shouldn't be this hard. It should not be this hard to get your kids' needs met, to function in a society that is full of so many resources and wealth. And I just started kind of thinking about what could I do? Because I'm a big believer that if you can, you should. And every day when we come to the table, we should use the tools that we have to make a change. And that brings me to this work. So somehow the city of Salem created this incredible unicorn role for a social worker like me as the director of the Salem Children's Alliance. So since February, I have been able to partner with a lot of folks in this room and beyond to begin doing the work. And this is work that feels really daunting. It's very complicated because it all matters, right? When you think about cradle to career efforts and, exploring equity issues, it's complicated. And we're all human, right? So we stumble, we fumble, we do it messy, right? But that's the beauty in it, right? Is having stakeholders and committed folks to do it with. And I'll give you a couple of examples today of things that we're working on already, some relative successes and some exciting things that are happening down the pipeline. And really, I'm here to learn along with all of you about the Child Friendly City Initiative and hearing from folks at UNICEF. I just think it's a really compelling partnership to explore for us as community leaders to think about moving forward, because there's already so many good things happening in Salem. There's so many great things happening in the schools and, different agencies and in homes, right? Because at the end of the day, the families need to be at the table as well. So let's see here. All right, so this is my favorite quote. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. That's really what it's all about. We don't have to have a perfect, crystal clear plan as long as we are sharing the vision and we're committed to the work. So since February, a lot of what I did was kind of listening, going out into the community. I met with many of you to hear about what you're doing. And although I've worked in Salem, this is my 15th year working in Salem, I'm looking at the problems through a new lens, right? So before I was working with children and families, I was down in the trenches. I was putting out fires all day, every day. For those of you who work directly with youth and families, you know how it is. You're going 100 miles an hour every single day. You don't slow down. So even though I know this community, I wasn't looking at it in the same way in this new role. So I was able to really zoom out and think about where are the gaps, where are the redundancies, where are we getting a gold star? How could we amplify efforts? And what do we have in common? So that's what I began doing. And I was really inspired along the way. I think a huge shout out goes to Salem Public Schools. The fact that they are doing so many innovative things, especially in the middle school and the high school right now, to really engage with students and create a sense of belonging and community. That's what it's all about, is feeling a sense of belonging and connection. Because at the end of the day, we can't fix every problem, but if we feel like we are partnering and someone has our back, whether you're 6 years old or you're 60 years old, that makes a difference. Having a soft place to land and seeing a child every single day, just say hi to you. You don't know what that means. And I want to tell you a quick story because this is one of my many aha moments that a child gave me a few years ago. So I was, at the time I was working as a middle school adjustment counselor here in Salem. And for many years I had worked with this one young lady, and she was graduating. And so it was the senior week where they have a lot of fun activities. And she had emailed me and said, Miss Roy, could I stop by and have coffee with you after my final exam? And I said, of course, that would be lovely. And this student, when I tell you like a superstar kid, when you think about that kid who's just wise beyond their years, engaged in so many great things, really pushes themselves. On paper, she was a star. But what a lot of people didn't know is that she had one of the most complex trauma histories that I've ever seen. Her life was extremely challenging. She was the definition of resiliency. And she overcame so much because home was a war zone for her every single day, if she had a home. So there were periods throughout her middle school and high school years where her family was unhoused. And there were addiction and mental health issues that she had to face every single day. But school was her safe place, which is why she thrived in school. And I knew that, but I kept that private, of course, for obvious reasons. So she didn't want people to know how messy her life was, because at school she could show up, she could do a good job. She felt seen, she felt heard, she felt inspired. So she told me last day of her senior year of high school, she said, she was thanking me. We were talking about some memories and about her goals. She got a full ride scholarship to college and was really optimistic just about getting out and living in the dorms and starting her adulthood. And some of you who've worked in schools, you know about duties, right? So I had morning duty for many years in the cafeteria. When I tell you a middle school cafeteria in the mornings is maybe like, I don't know, the 8th layer of hell. Like it's really awful. For many reasons. So I did that for 11 years. I would start my day and just be like, all right, what are we in for? I would talk to my colleagues. I would do whatever we do, right? I would show up. I would yell at kids and say, sit down, don't throw food. What are you doing? Do you need help with your homework? We're always doing all the things, right, with kids. And so I didn't even think anything of it. And she said, when I was in middle school, you know how you would have morning duty? And I said, yeah. And she's like, do you know that every morning I would show up early to school those 3 years of middle school and I would study you? And I said, what? And she said, I would, and she started rattling off these really detailed observations that I was like, holy cow, that makes me a little self-conscious. But she was talking specifically about, and this was years later, what I wore. She's like, you would come in and you would always have your coffee and you would talk to Miss Onembo and blah, 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 blah. And, but I would study you and I would say, this is what a healthy adult does in the mornings. This is how she looks. This is how she talks. This is how she treats people. This is how she moves through the world. Because I had never seen a healthy adult starting their day. I have chills and I get a little teared up thinking about that. And it was one of those kind of heart-stopping moments for me that little eyes are watching all the time. And when we think about kids who endure so much trauma in their lives, modeling healthy behavior, how you treat people, how you move through the world, that is bigger than any lesson they're going to learn in a book, right? How you treat people matters. Connection matters. And some of the things she was saying was, when I asked her opinion about things, and I said, hey, I'm starting, this new mentoring program. What would have been helpful for you when you were in middle school? What were the things that you really found helpful or that you would have needed when you were that age from a high school mentor? And so she gave me feedback and she said, just feeling heard and feeling listened to and respected by an adult. She was like, that blew me away. It was the only time in my life I had experienced that outside of class, class participation with the teachers. So I say those things to you now. Come on in, come join us, have a seat. There's some seats up front, or you can sit in the back. There's chairs.
I will interrupt just momentarily.
Yes.
We are trying very hard to engage young people because this is really for them, right? We have beautiful art from the Boys and Girls Club here in Salem, and we have students who are coming in to join us. And you should eat snacks and come and join us. And they're going to have to leave to go to class at some point, but it's important for them to learn about child participation and what communities can do because they are where it's at. So thank you. There's all kinds of chairs up here. You'll be scared.
So I tell you that story, and again, I didn't plan to share that story, but as I think about what matters in my life and what really what drives me to really work towards changing systems in our community and beyond. It is that young lady, it is children just like her that say, I never even felt seen by an adult, much less empowered. And I was one of a million people that was doing the work, right? We're all doing the work. So I wasn't doing anything different than any of you would do. All right, so back to my slideshow. So one of the things that I was able to do was establish a steering committee. So one of the things that's really important when you're working in community-based work and when you're doing macro social work is having a community of invested stakeholders. So we have established a Children's Cabinet Steering Committee, and there's a lot to build off of. It's not where it needs to be because, again, when you do things for the first time, it is messy, it's uncomfortable, and you just go with it, right? You learn from your mistakes. And we're really committed to providing cradle to career support to empower families and foster partnerships to ensure that every child has access to the resources and opportunities that are necessary for a successful and fulfilling life. So we're working together as a team to think about what are our goals. And it does feel really challenging, but we know that education is a community mission and none of us can do it when we're functioning in silos, right? So we function in silos whether we mean to or not. I know that I was doing it in the schools because when you're looking down and you have an emergency in front of you, it's really hard to think about big picture systems. And that's what we're here for. We're here to take a step back and think about, all right, what can I do related to this end goal? Because none of us can do it independently. So again, how do we identify priorities when it all matters? So I wanted to give you just one quick example of something that's been happening for several months now. The Commonwealth Preschool Partnership Initiative is something that the Salem Public Schools have been working on for a couple of years now. And so with the understanding that all children deserve high quality, consistent early childhood education in the state of Massachusetts, we were fortunate to get a grant. Governor Healy is committed to pre-K for all, especially in some of these gateway communities where there are high needs. But we know that laying a firm foundation of education for our youngest learners is critical, right? And also along with that, I was saying to some of you earlier, parents and caregivers deserve to have options, right? Because it's not a one size fits all kind of solution with early childhood care. So I am a parent. I have a 6-year-old and a 10-year-old. And when I was choosing a daycare and a preschool, I had options. There were some things that were really important to me. There were other things that, were lower on the list of priorities. But I was able to make that decision because I am in a position of privilege and access, right? So when you think about every caregiver in our community, where do you even begin? This is what I've heard over and over again, like, I just moved here. I don't even think I can afford daycare. I can't afford preschool. It's so expensive. Or I heard, my aunt is doing it. So she has an in-home daycare. So I guess we'll just go there. And that's fine for a lot of people. That's fine. But to be able to know what your options are is really important because there's a wide range of settings for our little ones. So the city is doing some really great things with, I think now they have 8 different classrooms, pre-K classrooms, maybe 12. Laura, do you know off the top of your head? 12?
8.
Yeah, that's what it
added the dual language pre-K.
Okay. Yeah. So we have 8 preschool classrooms in, I think, 5 different settings, including Salem Public Schools. And they are all receiving high quality curriculum for their pre-K students and extra staff training, because another thing that we struggle with early childhood care is high staff turnover, because our early childhood educators are typically paid very, very low. So we understand that they need to be invested in, they need to be empowered to stay and have roots within their schools and their settings. And so the CPPI grant is able to to provide funding for that. They also funded my role. My initial role is funded through this grant because they wanted to have someone based in the city that was kind of had an objective view that was really here for the kids and the families. So we've been working on that since I started in February, but this predates my time by a couple of years. And one of the things that I said when I first began was I was really looking for data, because one of the things that we all know is anecdotes are lovely, warm fuzzies are lovely, but we really need to see numbers and we need to see results in order to advocate for change. So we are completing a early childhood landscape analysis. It will be out by the holidays. And we will be using that early childhood landscape analysis to inform a strategic plan related to early childhood education in the city of Salem. So that's one thing that we're checking off the list moving forward. Feels really exciting. But now we're all over the map, friends, right? When you think about cradle to career, I also include caregiver mental health. I think that that's a huge component. I talk about it in every meeting. Many of you have heard me say this just as recently as yesterday. You can't drink from an empty cup. I'm a caregiver. I know that when my mental health is not where it needs to be, I'm not present for my children. I'm not able to access resources. It feels like a lot. So some of the things that we are doing in the city of Salem, and specifically that I'm involved in, the first thing that I will talk about is, because it's so fresh, is yesterday we officially established a youth mental health task force. Some of the folks are in the room, Kelsey and Natalie from our local counseling centers. We have area leaders and advocates for mental health that will be working to talk about systems of change related to mental health. So that will be happening. We will be meeting monthly. If you are interested in joining that task force, please reach out to me later on. We are asking that folks that are related to the mental health field and working directly with folks in Salem are a part of that task force. That is the most kind of exciting new thing for me as of this week. But again, my day-to-day is very, very different depending on what's in front of me. And we are also relaunching one of the things that Laura Assad started and really ran with, did a phenomenal job in the city of Salem, the Salem Youth Commission. So the Salem Youth Commission is something that Laura Assad, when she worked in City Hall for Mayor Driscoll, she was able to establish a youth commission. They met regularly, high school age students in the city. They were able to stand up, identify problems, create action plans, all while building leadership skills, interpersonal effectiveness skills, and developing the skill set that really led to some really incredible things. So we will be relaunching that youth commission in the city. I'll be leading that. And applications are due this Friday. So stay tuned. We are really excited for that. And one of the things that I'm most excited about is that two of our alums, two of my former students, Johnny and Ayana. Ayana is a fourth grade teacher here in Salem. Johnny just finished his pre-med degree and is taking a year off to work in a local hospital. Two of my favorite students, they were both on my caseload when they were little ones, and now seeing them all grown up and really making a difference in the world. I mean, talk about full circle. That's what we all love seeing. So they've agreed to kind of be the alumni supports related to the Youth Commission. So I'm really excited for that as well.
I've recruited a third one.
Ooh, I'm excited to talk about it. That's great. So just really exciting stuff is happening. And another thing that is related to this work that was very unexpected for me is, I don't know if any of you have heard of Uplift Salem. It was a guaranteed basic income initiative, a pilot program through the city of Salem. Alphonse Wright was one of the first pioneers in the city to talk about the importance of this. So we have to definitely thank him for fighting for this behind the scenes. But Uplift Salem was something that I never expected when I took on this role. And a couple weeks into this, Mayor Pongalo said, hey, I need you to lead a pilot direct cash program. And I said, no, thank you. I said, thank you for asking, but I don't know what those words mean. So truly, I was like, because one of the things that you may or may not know about me is I'm very comfortable with showing my vulnerabilities and saying, I don't know any of this stuff. So thanks, but no thanks. So he said, too bad, you have to, you can do it because your vision and your values are aligned with this sort of thing. So So I went back and I watched a million YouTube videos, read a gajillion articles, reached out to community leaders who have successfully launched guaranteed basic income programs and just picked their brain. And we were able to create a really successful pilot program that was launched in October. And the quick kind of snapshot of Uplift Salem, and I'm happy to talk more about this. It doesn't really relate to this, but everything is interconnected. We're in the biggest Venn diagram ever in this room. We know that empowering folks is where it's at, right? If we want to tackle systems of oppression in a really meaningful way, we have to empower people to make choices that are right for them. It is not my decision to say, you know what, you should probably spend this $20 I'm giving you on some milk and bread, right? Like, what if you don't like milk and bread? What if you're lactose intolerant? What if you have celiac disease, right? What if you say, like, really just wanted some gummy worms and a banana? Like, you're allowed to make that choice because we have free will, right? That's the great thing about it. So with Uplift Salem, 100 folks who are living at or below the federal poverty level will be receiving $500 a month for 12 months, starting November 27th. The first checks are going out just in time for the holidays. Super happy about that. So these folks will be able to spend $500 a month on whatever they see fit. So we are assuming, based on data that's been collected kind of nationally with programs like this, that folks will spend it on things they need. What do they need? That's up to them to decide. So with this, I think the most exciting part of this is the research component. So again, I love being able to kill multiple birds with one stone. No offense, birds. But I was able to partner with Salem State. Salem State recently launched a North Shore Policy Lab. Dr. Sarah Moore and Dr. Tom Pinheiro-Shields are our research partners. And so we have partnered with them, and they are leading their students right here in Salem to do the research. So they are I've gone into the classroom to meet with the students, and I'll be working with a team of researchers, and they will be doing baseline data, not only for the 100 participants that were selected, but also 100 applicants that did not get selected via lottery, to compare the data. So we'll be able to say, okay, baseline, 6-month, 12-month, but also 18-month. How did this change your life? We know it's going to change lives. Maybe it won't change every single life, all 100 people, but we know the impact is going to be astounding, and we're really eager to contribute to a larger conversation about anti-poverty strategies in communities, both at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. Really excited about it. And we also know that this is going to impact children in our communities, right? So if my caregiver has $500 a month to pay the electric bill, they might be able to, register me for softball. And I've always really wanted to play softball, right? It's a very small example. Or I have diabetes and my family hasn't been able to afford my insulin, right? Like, think about it. Like, there's just so many great options. So more with that later, but it's really exciting stuff, and really wild, radical things are happening in our community. And it just feels like such an exciting time to be working with you all. And then caregiver partnerships are always first and foremost with me. I love talking to families. I love hearing from families. I want to be doing more of that. I want to do more listening. I've been doing a lot of talking the last few months, and I kind of want to just sit and hear from the folks in the community about what's going on. One of the things that we're really excited about is tomorrow we'll be doing a mobile mayor's office. So one of the things that I've been able to set up with the Salem High leadership is Mayor Pongalo is going to be doing a listening session with the high schoolers. So I said, Mayor, I think more than anything, the kids just want to be heard. So tomorrow morning, we're going to be starting our day at 7:45 with a bunch of high school students, just hearing what's important to them, asking those questions. What are you guys facing? We need to be doing more of that. Leaders need to listen, right? We can't make assumptions about what people need and want, certainly what kids need and want. And that's what this is all about. Oh, and then lastly, college and career pathways. I mean, Salem High and Salem Academy are doing just a phenomenal job preparing our young students for life beyond 12th grade. We need to be doing more of it. That is an area of relative strength, but also I can tell you, as a former high school counselor, there is room to grow related to life skills. and resiliency and interpersonal connection and coping skills, the mental health component, I could go on. But there's a lot of really great things happening. We have some great partnerships with Mass Hire and with other folks in the community. And I'm really eager to kind of dig into that work as well down the road. So again, zooming out in my role, old systems, new lens, who's missing from the table? But more importantly, do they know the table even exists? Because I see the same people around the table in most meetings I'm at. So I'm really trying to think strategically around who's missing from the room. That's something that I ask a lot. And a lot of times it's the youth voice. I was talking to a young man yesterday who's creating, he's running a summer event for the city of Salem. And he was asking about the board. Do you know anybody who would be interested in joining the board? And I said, what about a high school student? If you're serving youth, you should have a high school student be on the board. And he's like, oh, right. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as talking about it and thinking outside of the box. Because when you're in the zone, it's really hard to think objectively, right? Which is why we all need one another. So moving forward, we will be working collectively to establish some sustainable practices and systems that will hopefully live forever in the city of Salem and beyond. I think the spotlight is really on Salem now. We're in a much different place than we were 10 years ago, and it feels really, I feel really optimistic about the direction that we're headed in across the board, specifically serving youth and families here in the city. So as we go through the next few minutes, I want us to kind of talk at our tables. I think we have about 10 minutes before our next speaker comes on. We have a video speaker, right? Is it a remote speaker?
No, we have our UNICEF speaker.
UNICEF speaker. Okay. So for the next 10 minutes, I want us to talk at our tables. I want you to think about, what does it mean to thrive? When you think about a child who is thriving, what do you picture? What are the images that pop into your mind? I'm a visual learner, so I automatically picture a movie scene, right? What does that mean to thrive? You can pick any age, whether you're 13, whether you're 3, picture a child thriving or a group of children thriving. What does that mean? And we'll open it up. I'll go around to tables and we can kind of talk about it. But, and also, we're all bringing our own experiences to the table. I know some of us are coming into the conversation having a lot of adverse childhood experiences, and that's real. So thinking about a thriving child, thinking about our past sometimes triggers some memories and some feelings. And when I think about, what I wish I would have had as a child, I think about what a thriving child looks like compared to kind of what my childhood experience was. I think about that a lot. And I'm sure some of you do as well. So think about what that means. What does a thriving child experience look like? Thank you so much for just taking the time to hear about the exciting things that are happening in the city. And I just welcome all of your feedback. I welcome your partnership. I'm here to kind of amplify your efforts and your organizations, and I'm inspired by the helpers in our city and beyond every single day, which is why I'm able to take this leap and take the risk to develop new systems. So thank you so much. I think next we're going to have Krista from UNICEF come up and present and tell us more about UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities Initiative. There you go. That's a mouthful. Thanks, Al.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. And thanks for gathering us all here today in beautiful Salem. I love Salem a lot, and you may hear me reference some things that I love about Salem. And I apologize for the people that are here that are sick of hearing about things that people that don't live in Salem really like or think that they know about Salem, because I am one of them. So I'm Krista Becker, and I am the Assistant Director of Municipal Partnerships at UNICEF USA. And I'm here to talk more about some of the key elements of our Child Friendly Cities Initiative. And you'll often hear me refer to it throughout this as its acronym, which is CFCI, because Child Friendly Cities Initiative is a mouthful. So this initiative is really a framework that's enabled cities across the world and across the US to adopt a child-centered local governance strategy that ultimately improves outcomes for children in their city. We're going to watch a short video about this.
아이들의 시각으로 이제 정책을 제안한다라는 거죠.
Where people don't mind what you look like, if you're a boy or a girl or how old you are, you can just be you.
Em mong là các bạn là bình thường sẽ có những cái thiện cảm về các bạn khiếm thị, không có nên kỳ thị các bạn khiếm thị.
Tutaj говорим о караме нашей общине, как жителей, как респондент.
Якби я був мером, я забудував би більше книжників.
Я би поставила новий урок фінансова грамотність.
Man wird halt hier wirklich in den Entscheidungsprozess eingebunden, dass wir zum Beispiel jetzt als Kinder und Jugendliche durch den Baui eine Stimme bekommen haben und auch wirklich was erreichen können.
Si yo fuera alcalde, mi prioridad sería el sistema educativo. Creo que es la base de una buena sociedad.
Манай research гэх юм уу тийм яг хүүхдүүдийн бас боловсрол эрүүл мэндэд нь анхаарч байгаа юм байна. Бас биднийг аягүй өөрхөн
Želimo si, da bi šolske poti bile malo bolj urejene, seveda so že zdaj, ampak lahko bi bilo bolje.
Child-friendly cities, things more accessible for kids and kids can leave the house without being scared of what's going to happen.
Weil es für Kinder wichtig ist, auch einen zweiten Ort zu haben, außerhalb der Schule, um Freunde kennenzulernen, Erfahrungen zu sammeln.
그렇게 안전하면서도 위험하게 놀 수 있는 그런 놀이터가 지금 제 꿈놀이터거든요. 그물망도 설치돼 있고 짚라인도 그렇게 놀 수 있는 것 같고 그 놀이터가 되게 좋아요. 그래서.
So that was a little bit into some of our, obviously our work globally. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what we've done in the US. So as you'll see on the screen, these are the 6 cities that we have partnerships with right now throughout the US. We launched in 2019 in the US, and we've continued to grow since then throughout the US, making a difference in the lives of nearly 1 million children across the nation. So I'm going to take a moment and focus on some of the communities that you see on here. Minneapolis, which I have the pleasure of being a relationship manager with, and that we have Christy and Maddie here to talk about a little bit later today. So I'm happy to go into them a little bit, although it may be a repeat of what they're saying, but I said it first, so I get credit. So Minneapolis is a great city, and they were our 2nd city in the US to be recognized as a child-friendly city. They focused on 4 areas for their local action plan, and I'll get into later on what a local action plan is and the different steps of the process. But through a situation analysis, so really speaking to adults and children and youth in their communities, they were able to find 4 themes for improvement at the city level. The first was increasing youth participation. The next was community safety, emergency preparedness, and child rights awareness.
They are also our first city in the US to formally enter into a partnership with us for a renewal cycle. So you'll learn more about the CFCI cycle, but it is a cycle. So once you get recognition, that cycle continues to really deepen and further that work. So we're really excited to continue to work with them over the next at least 5 years as they take on the renewal cycle. We also have some great other cities up here. Decatur is about to become our third child-friendly city in the US. Decatur's a city right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and they're looking to get recognition at the end of this year, early next year. And some other great cities across here are Houston, which was our first child-friendly city. They focused on many areas, but including mental health, which sounds like a big area of focus for this city as well. And I can go into more of the cities if you guys have any questions about that. All right. So why do we bring children's rights approach to local governments and decision making in the US? In the US, we face a really big challenge as well as a great opportunity. It's one of the world's wealthiest nations, and yet almost 10 million children in the US live in neighborhoods that they have limited access to good schools, spacious, nice parks, nutritious food, and more. All the while, we know that local governments are at the forefront of incubating and scaling innovative and sustainable solutions to these problems and to increase the well-being of residents, including their children. In the US, local governments like Salem really have a unique opportunity in this moment to positively change the narrative for America's families and children, starting at the local level, bringing it nationally, and then hopefully globally. By coming together as you are today, really the goal is to transform the way we make decisions about children and make better investments and improve outcomes for them over time. So let's kind of zoom out and look at the impact that it's had globally. So it started in 1996, and it has since been adopted in over 3,000 municipalities globally, in over 40 countries, and an estimated 30 million children have been impacted by this initiative. And so while it's relatively new in the US, when I come here today, I'm really encouraged by your commitments to make Salem more child-friendly and being informed by nearly 3 decades of global experience with CFCI. So this is the slide. I really wanted to put a picture of the children from Hocus Pocus, but I thought it's a little too soon. I don't know you guys that well, but you should know that it is my favorite movie of all time. And so just know I'm showing some real restraint by not doing that, but maybe in the future you will see a picture like that up. So let's start with, is Salem child-friendly? So it sounds like these are some of the conversations that you guys are already having, as we heard from Sarah. To figure this out, we really like to ask the kids and youth that live here these questions that are up on the screen. And so I'm wondering if we can take a moment, maybe a minute or two at your tables, and you can discuss what you have either heard from kids and youth in this community throughout the last year, or if you are a youth in this community, talk about your thoughts about if Salem is child-friendly. So go ahead and take a couple of moments. All right, so I'll do a much meaner version, which is from summer camp in the early 2000s, which is hands go up, mouths go shut, which is not very nice, but that's what I grew up doing for children. So again, good that I'm not doing direct face with children anymore, because that's not good to say. So I do like what you say better. So I'm glad that you guys had such vibrant discussions at the table. We'll continue that throughout the day and the afternoon. But UNICEF USA is really here to make sure that every young person feels safe and is heard by adults in their life, welcomed throughout their communities, and empowered to access support and opportunities. Through CFCI, a city will spend some time undergoing an initial cycle towards recognition, like cities in this room, like Minneapolis, have gone through. It can take approximately 3 years, give or take a couple of years. It depends on a city's readiness to take on this work, and we'll talk about what readiness looks like a little bit later on in this. All right, so what is CFCI all about? So, what we do through CFCI is we ask children and youth what they need from where they live. And the goal is to build a city that works differently. So CFCI aims to involve children and youth in every step of the process and put them at the center of discussions that impact them. That way, Salem and other local governments can make policies, provide resources, and make citywide improvements that children and youth really want and need. So what is a child-friendly city? So we define this at UNICEF USA as a local government in which children's voices, needs, priorities, and rights are an integral part of the policies, programs, and decisions. A child-friendly city is one where children's rights are woven into the structure of the city and where children and youth feel their voices are heard and needed. Because children are still developing, they're in an especially vulnerable place, and poor living conditions such as poverty or inadequate healthcare and environmental pollution can have an adverse effect on them. The cost of failing children is significant, which is why the CFCI model places an emphasis on child rights, which is based on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which we talked about a little bit earlier today, and I have the pleasure of getting more in depth into. All right, so let's start with what are child rights. So you probably already know that everybody has human rights and we all have the same rights in this room. So the question is, why are we talking about children or humans under 18 having their own sort of special rights? And that's because children have human rights, but they also have child rights, which are very special to them. So child rights are global minimum standards that ensure the protection, survival, and development of all persons under 18 without discrimination. So human rights are inherent, universal, inalienable, indivisible, and independent. And children require special rights because on one hand, they are reliant on adults and caregivers for certain things, but it's also because they're in a special stage of development and they need special rights and special protection to give them the best chance to develop and be the best human being that they can be. So child rights are really a special subset of human rights, and they are legally enshrined in the UN's Convention on the Rights of the Child, or CRC. We really do love acronyms at the UN. And we will get the details of this treaty in just a moment. So as you guys see on this colorful page, these are some of, and let me move this so that you can see them. These over here are some articles that are part of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And that's really what it's made up of, is several articles. And so the convention is not just for them, but it's often for people under 18 that need special care and protection that adults do not. So as we said earlier, it was adopted in 1989 after 10 years of intense negotiation from leaders around the world. And it's made up of a list of agreements called articles, which are the colorful ones you see on this page. And it really outlines the specific rights that children and young people can claim. So the convention really reflects a revolutionary new vision for children. And it says that children are not the property of parents or caregivers, and they're also not helpless objects of charity, which was really innovative for the time. And they are human beings with rights and responsibilities appropriate to their stage of development. So as we said earlier, it's really the often described as the best human rights treaty in the world, and it's very special. So I'll go into some of the things which are also on the screen about it. So it's the only human rights treaty that's actually focused on children. And it's the first legally binding international instrument to incorporate a full range of human rights, everything from civic, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. And it is the most comprehensive. And this includes the right to survival, to develop to the fullest, to protection from violence, and participate in family, cultural, and social life. It's the first human rights treaty that grants a role to its implementation as a specialized UN agency, which is UNICEF. And UNICEF actually helped draft this. It is the most widely ratified treaty in the world. Over So actually 196 UN member states have ratified it. And that means that those national governments have actually made a commitment to protecting the rights of their countries. Oh, as I moved this, I got my little pointer all off. One moment. Okay, so unfortunately, the lead was already given, but can anybody say which country has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child if you were listening earlier? Yes, it is the US. And I do want to kind of give a caveat with that, because we could easily end and say, US is the worst. I can't believe that they haven't done that. And I'm here to provide a little bit more context into that. And it doesn't mean that children's rights aren't important here. So again, it does mean that they're not legally protected, which can cause some gaps in child advocacy, but that's why local government is so important. So actually, the US was really involved in the drafting of the treaty, and it actually did sign on to the convention in 1995, but it hasn't ratified it. So it has actually adopted 2 of its 3 optional protocols, though, which is the involvement of children in armed conflict and the sale of children. So as you guys know from our political context, we often get caught up in what is at the state level versus the federal level, which is why this has really gotten kind of tied up in the US. And so again, it's talking about what the responsibilities are of the state versus the federal level. And we're in a really good place as a supportive state to really fulfill the CRC in Massachusetts and other states also at the state level. So the issue that can come up, which is really important to know because you may hear it out there and not quite understand what it's talking about, is some people get confused about the CRC in saying that it grants children's rights, and they think that that is at the expense of parental rights. We hear that often, and it's important to know that actually that's not the case. So the treaty really recognizes the importance of parents and families, and it obligates governments to respect parents as the primary responsibility, providing care and guidance for their children. Okay, so regardless of whether the US has ratified the CRC, it is a powerful framework that we do use, and it's validated by global consensus. So it ensures that all of our decisions and behaviors and programs are at the best interest of every child without discrimination. So we believe that there are 4 rights given special status as guiding principles that we use to ground our child rights approach. And you can see them up here on the screen with their beautiful images with them. So it's non-discrimination. Is every child and young person being treated fairly and protected from discrimination? Best interests of the child. Are we ensuring that all of our actions and decisions prioritize the well-being and development of the child? Life, survival, and development. Are we considering the physical and emotional social well-being and development of every child and participation? Are we asking children their views and taking them seriously in matters that affect them? Okay, so the child rights approach really builds on the capacity and awareness among children ages 0 to 18 as rights holders. So you'll see them on the one side, the blue side here. And on the other side, the capacity and awareness building among duty bearers. You'll see on the white side or the gray. And they are really there as both government and non-government actors that play the role of duty bearers. So that could be anything from police officers in a community, lawyers, teachers, social workers. And one way to understand this concept is through what we call the human rights arch, which is the strongest structure in architecture. And without one side, the other collapses. All right, so now we're going to move on to some of the specifics of UNICEF USA's CFCI framework. All right, so UNICEF USA's CFCI framework consists of 2 pillars: goals and results achieved, and strategies for achieving these goals and results. So the 5 goal areas inspired by the CRC exist to protect the safety, health, and happiness of every child and young person ages 0 to 18. Local governments strive to achieve and measure their success as a child-friendly city in at least one of these 5 priority areas listed here: safety and inclusion, children's participation, equitable social services, safe living environments, play and leisure. And a city must identify at least one of these CFCI goal areas to form a local action plan around. So through CFCI and other municipal partnership approaches, UNICEF USA encourages cities and communities to achieve their goals and realize results for children through strategies and prioritize and integrate the best interests of the children that amplifies their perspective and decision making. So based on our experience at UNICEF and our global research as well, we've been able to indicate 5 strategies to integrate youth engagement into governance. And so that is children's budgeting, child impact statements, youth councils, children's cabinets, and youth ombuds offices. So each of these strategies can work independently or they can work together to provide opportunities for meaningful youth engagement in decision making. And it's through these strategies that we expect communities to realize results around CFCI goal areas over time. And in partnership, all of this is in partnership with children and youth in an evidence-informed way. Okay, so let's get into some of the nitty-gritty around what it means to actually go through the CFCI process. So to become a nationally recognized UNICEF USA child-friendly city, a local government will embark on a 6-step comprehensive process towards recognition with UNICEF USA. So it must incorporate non-discrimination and youth participation into each step of the process. And we estimate that this six-step process takes anywhere from 3 to 4 to plus or minus a couple of years to complete. And it's very dependent on the readiness of each city. So the 6-step process, as you can see on here, is joining CFCI. So in this stage, city leaders identify their existing resources and structures, as well as areas for improvement. They'll also sign an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, with UNICEF USA and designate resources and assign a CFCI coordinator. So that's really a central person that's coordinate all the efforts at both the city level, but also with UNICEF USA. Next is stakeholder engagement. So here is where city leaders will provide recommendations for local stakeholders, such as well-connected business owners, nonprofit leaders, city officials, to join their executive committee. Next is the situation analysis. In this phase, it's all about gaining the qualitative and quantitative insights and context to inform your local action plan and bringing in critical youth, parent, and community voices. In this phase, cities conduct what we call community conversations, and they collect city data through a multi-generational approach and complete a situation analysis summary that really says what the needs are of the city. Next is the local action plan, which I've talked about throughout this, but here's a little bit more context into that. So this phase is about talking about what you learned during that situation analysis. So during those conversations with people in your community, and it's using that data to develop a plan of action. So the global minimum requirements for CFCI do stipulate that local action plans must include 3 focus areas. One is around youth participation, the second is non-discrimination, and the third is one focus area that's just identified as a local need. Some communities have chosen areas like mental health or community safety. It's really up to you guys and what the data shows you through those conversations. The 5th step is implementation. So once a local action plan has been developed, cities then work to implement the plan and make meaningful impacts for young people in their community. So to implement the plan, we ask that cities create an implementation work plan that measures against 2 progress indicators. So the first is number of youth engaged in policy efforts, and the second is number of child rights policy or budget changes to show progress towards the results. And then finally, in this cycle of it, the final step is evaluation and recognition. So once implementation happens of the plan and it's complete, cities then submit their materials to UNICEF USA. And just so you know, this whole part, it's a total partnership. Nothing is here as a surprise. We're there with you guys the whole time. And then the recognition happens to be a child-friendly city, and an external evaluation is conducted to state whether you guys have met what you put out in the local action plan. And then a big fun celebration happens. So, and we have a formal proclamation or community event through that. And it's really up to the city how they want to do that. And so CFCI really is a transformative change process, and it's meant to be cyclical. So after the first cycle, after you get renewal, we have a big party, and then we get started on the work for the next cycle. It's really about deepening, enhancing, and sustaining the efforts that were made through CFCI, much like Minneapolis has done. All right, so I'm here to also talk a little bit about how UNICEF USA is newly working with communities, not just through CFCI, but through some of our other initiatives. So we have been doing this work since 2019, and over 4 years ago, we launched this, and we have learned so much from then. So we're really excited to talk about some of the new approaches that we're taking. So one approach that cities can take with us is what I just talked about, CFCI. It's really the gold standard, and it's also a really ambitious undertaking for every community across the country to take. And so we recognize that. It really has to do with the readiness of the city to take this on, and the process that they go through for that. So that might not be the best choice for every city. We also support cities around child-centered city governance. So we do a lot of research at UNICEF USA, and we have consultations to build our advocacy and partnership strategy to support the adoption and improvement of child-centered local strategies amongst municipalities throughout the country. And at UNICEF USA, we're focusing on 5 strategies to integrate into child governance. So it's the ones that I talked about earlier, which is children's budgets, child impact statements, youth councils, children's cabinets, and youth ombudsman offices. We also are leveraging this historic opportunity that's coming up in 2026. Does anybody know about a really exciting thing coming to the US in 2026? It has to do with sports. Does anybody know what it is? World Cup. Yes. So the World Cup is coming to the US in 2026, and it's actually hosting in 11 different cities and communities throughout the US. And so this is a really unique opportunity for UNICEF USA and the National League of Cities and other members of our Child Rights Alliance to really drive the impact of child rights and center youth voices at the community level to really plan around this impactful event that's coming up. And finally, we have a great national learning community. And so it's really our community of policymakers, subject matter experts, advocates, and researchers that foster great collaboration throughout the nation, and they share impactful research and connect our community of municipal partnerships and research partners. All right, so let's get into some of the CFCI minimum criteria that we have. So a formal partnership between a city and UNICEF USA to undergo the CFCI framework is really dependent on a city's readiness, as I've mentioned. So we really want cities to meet a certain criteria, minimum criteria, as well as the capacity of UNICEF USA goes into whether we are able to partner formally for CFCI. So recently coming out of our pilot, which was our first 4 years of this program, we learned a lot, and we had an initial cohort, including Minneapolis, of municipal partners that we were able to provide the highest level of support and deliver impact results. We learned a lot from that when it came from capacity for us, capacity for the cities to take that on. And now we've started a ambitious plan to modestly grow the program over time. And we're going to begin partnering with a limited number of new cities every 1.5 years through this. So in order for cities to demonstrate that they're ready for this, we're asking at a minimum that they have mayoral endorsement and city council support to do this work. Something that's really important that we've learned over time is that we want to make sure CFCI is sustainable. So throughout administrations, that it's not tied to a certain person that's elected and therefore goes away when that person leaves office. We want to make sure that there's a nonpartisan agenda for children and a commitment to a child rights approach at the city level. And we find it's important to allocate resources to fund CFCI staff, whether that's one person sort of leading it or multiple people sort of taking it on as part of their job. So right now, we're not actively recruiting new members, but we do plan to open up and engage new cities in early 2025. So in the new year, we're going to be rolling out a streamlined process for a handful of interested cities to help cities assess their own readiness and enable us to select our next small cohort of CFCA partners within the next 1.5 years. All right, so that's it for today, but I wanted to leave you all with this quote that we actually got from a CFCI workshop in Boulder, and a child expressed that it feels amazing to be asked my opinion. That doesn't happen very often. So we're really here to change that.
Well, everybody, it's nice to be able to continue to learn about what Minneapolis is doing. We have 2 presentations from international partners, around 11, so there may be a little bit of transition getting them to come in from the UK to join us, so that let us start. We have Maddie Wegner and Christy Rodeos-Palmer, and they're going to enlighten you about what's happening in Minneapolis, and then they're going to stay here this afternoon and work with you in work groups to help you to be able to talk about how to move forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yvonne. I think we first want to just say it's been exciting this morning to hear about what's happening already on the ground here. And thank you, Sarah, for that incredible, foundation, and for all that all of you are doing with families and young people. And thanks especially for having young people here with us this morning. That was one of the most powerful experiences for me. And I just wanted to, we too love this video. And so if we can just kind of conjure up what you heard this morning in it for a moment. I'll just mention that my work has been with Christy at Human Rights Educators USA recently. We met through shared work at something called the Nobel Peace Prize Festival in Minneapolis, where we had the great fun of, I worked with middle school and high school students studying and developing curricula around each Nobel laureate as she, he, they came along, and then we got to meet them, which has to do with a long-standing community relationship with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee, of all things, right? We just got lucky in Minnesota. So we use this as the beginning of a little middle school introduction to child rights. If anybody's interested, we're happy to share. And Christy can tell you a bit more about her background.
Well, I like props, so I'm holding one of them, but I've been around, I guess, this work for quite a while, and am so impressed of all of your experience and who's in this room. And if I were naming it, I think you all are ready for the Child Friendly Cities Initiative and actually are doing it already. And so then it's just kind of connecting the dots and hopefully how you can do even more. And I think as Darius, who had to leave, said when we were asking, well, do you think, Salem is ready? He said, it has potential, which I like that, because it's kind of, we all have potential to continue to learn. So although we're going to kind of mention Minneapolis, what we've done, we're still a work in progress. And we kind of worked with UNICEF back in the day to start this. And I was talking with Tom, who's a pediatrician, and just to give a little history, because I like history. But Dr. Oberg, Chuck Oberg, who's on our executive committee for the Child Friendly Cities, went to Geneva, actually, and talked to UNICEF with another pediatrician friend or a couple. And they said, well, why aren't you in the United States? And that's what that just posing those questions is what ended up there was then a conference down in Jacksonville saying, okay, is the U.S. ready for something like this? And then we kind of looked 5 years later, and here is what Krista did a great job giving. And I was learning too, and I think that even UNICEF USA has modified as, with the pilots as we've gone, and Minneapolis is doing that too. So anyhow, my background is, for over 30 years, or almost 30 years, I was co-directing the University of Minnesota Human Rights Center. So we've been involved in this human rights work and education, children's rights for decades. And I'll mention, but we can talk in either after this program if you're interested, or in the afternoon session. I'll just mention 3 concrete things we did. So early on in 92, showing my age, 32 years ago, we launched a program called Partners in Human Rights Education, where initially lawyers wanted to get into classrooms with teachers as a model to kind of co-teach about human rights education with young people, and then have them kind of bring their tools out into the community. And then we learned, oh wait, there should be community resources. So we developed a triad called the Partners in Human Rights Education. That resulted back when that we had some early childhood educators who were really excited to learn about the Convention on the Rights of the Child, now 35 years old today, when it was adopted. And so they created a curriculum called Raising Children with Roots, Rights, and Responsibility. That's actually available online. Obviously, it needs some updating, adapting, however you might use it if you find it useful. But it's really focused on the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child for that early child, young age, and parents. And I think we were talking some about the parent education. So since it's been around for a while, I was a parent at that time with a 2-year-old, and with my husband, and we've then piloted this curriculum at our local community education center. And so we'd get together and have that circle time at the beginning. Then there would be time for parents to figure out, how do you actually advocate on behalf of your children and work with your children? And then my 2-year-old was off there saying, what does a child need to grow and develop? And they'd be washing babies and learning about names, and then we'd come back together through circles and sing songs together. And that child now is a music therapist. So we were talking about the creativity about how do you kind of bring this? And she also is working as a bereavement coordinator. How do you look at that full life cycle and all of the life, ebbs and flows with trauma, with positivity in the families. So that's kind of my background. And I guess we both serve on the executive committee of that Child Friendly Cities Initiative and the specific team that's focusing on education. Because our belief is one reason that this convention hasn't gotten through is because we don't know about it. You ask how many people have learned. I was in a law class just last week talking about it. I said, so how many of you even knew that this Convention on the Rights of the Child exists? Nope, it's not being taught. And I want to mention that there are 3 optional protocols to this treaty that the U.S. has ratified. One on trafficking and sale of children, one on children in armed conflict. And I think it's important to kind of mention that with some of the gender issues, floating, and so that we have opportunities. And my last point around the Convention on the Rights of the Child and our work, is that we are also with Yvonne and with Nicole, we serve on the steering committee for Human Rights Educators USA, the national networks, and our regional directors, or regional resource people. So we have a national group that I think it's nice to tap into, so that you feel like you're not in isolation when sometimes you're getting new programs started or such.
Yeah, so I want Nicole to wave so everybody knows she's your Wisconsin resource. You have a fair and broad representation of Midwesterners today, all wanting to see the ocean. And so we just thought we'd have you think for a minute, again, back to our incredibly inspiring young person who wants to know, so what will you do? So could you just take a minute at your tables and think, either what have you already done to support young people in this work? What do you feel like needs to be done? just a couple minutes, then we'll share out a couple ideas, because I feel like we've heard again about such fertile work happening already here. So let's just take a couple minutes on that, please. Thank you.
So could we just hear a couple examples of what you guys came up with? What bubbled up for you? How about, since I saw a nod, can I ask you all?
We were talking about like why is this something that we already have here?
I was shocked.
Or in the city. So and what we were saying is that there may be some policies and efforts put in place, but they're in silos, and it's not like a citywide effort to make this happen. So I appreciate this conversation.
Oh, thank you. I mean, I think it's also, aren't we lucky to have Yvonne and Sarah and all of you who see the relevance here in this room to help coordinate those pieces. Thank you. Others who sort of saw promising things bubbling up from your tables?
Talk a little bit prior to, I think Ms. Sarah is such a wonderful resource for the city and a great position to have. I think, and we were just talking a couple weeks ago, like there are a ton of resources, but you have to have a level of savviness to know where they are and how to get to them.
Yep.
And I think that really, like, we have a lot of folks that are very involved in the community that have a strong sense of belonging, and that's really wonderful. And we have a lot of folks who are maybe newer to the community, newer to the country even. And I think understanding where those resources are, how to access them, how to make meaningful use of them is very different. So I think, you know, having the infrastructure to make all of that accessible for our whole community is really an area.
And since you've already, Yvonne is asking us to speak up a bit. I think it's especially for the benefit of the people online. But thank you for that. I think that was our awareness too.
And I think I'll repeat it for the people online, because it's actually the second bullet there. If we look at the 4/5 of children think that they could help politicians improve the country if consulted and if they know about opportunities. And I think that came out of the Minnesota assessment, was we don't know about the opportunities. And even Darius, this was a good match here, because I think there's a connection to a new creative coalition, creative collective, because he's got a new business plan, and all of a sudden, oh, hey, here's an opportunity. So I think your point around resource sharing, what's out there and how do you connect? I think that's reiterating what Laura had mentioned around, we're doing things in our own silos, but how might you be able to be more effective by looking at this interdisciplinary approach, which is what Krista was talking about for the kind of child-friendly cities, is that it might provide you new opportunities to cross-reference. And that's, I think, Sarah, now you've got a hub of someone who can help. Not that you can do it all alone, because it takes that full village.
Yeah, so we'll go, and Christy, if you want to come back, don't go too far from me here, Christy. I'm just trying to manage this little thing. We'll share with you a little bit about how Minneapolis is structured via our youth Congress.
Okay, so I think similar to what you have as your children's cabinet. So it's probably very similar in that this is what Minneapolis has as a structure for advising the mayor and kind of city representatives. And so I think you can definitely, or we use that as a model to really integrate with existing programs. And I think Minneapolis had, in a way, more challenges to try and fit it together, which you may find because you already have a lot going on. So then it's like, okay, where are the budgets? You know, because things are in maybe silos and you've never had the children's budget. Whereas I think Houston, as a model, did not have as many infrastructural setups. We also, Houston used and really went through the education approach as the other kind of, infusing this. We use the health approach. So our health department, along with the youth coordinating board and that youth Congress, were the ones that really were the hubs for this work. I think one of the challenges is, and opportunities, since you have a new position, you know, here with the Children's Alliance, I think that you may be just a very unique new model that others can learn from as well.
see if I can do this. Sorry about the funky formatting on some of these. I think it's just working between.
And while we're moving forward, I'm going to just run on one. We'll have it later. But this is an initiative on the youth or the health approach. So we had almost even before we did the full assessment, we were like, okay, how can we get started right away? So the health department said, okay, for the peds, can we work and collaborate with another partner called Reach Out and Read? And that is actually based here in Massachusetts. So I think working with Senator Lovely, maybe you can have this be a statewide initiative, but we worked with Reach Out and Read. And so our Hennepin County, through our PEDS department, every young child coming in for a wellness visit gets this book, I Have the Right to Be a Child. And we're now going up to the next level, which is another book for higher level children. But this idea of how can you get this into children's hands so that they're starting to say, oh, wait, what is this rights language? And I would say, so that you don't have too much pushback on that parent front that can be like, wait, do we give, or educator front, oh, do we give kids more rights? Oh, that panic. Along with that goes responsibilities. So you can just say, yes, okay, you have the right to speak up. You also have the responsibility to listen. And how do we, have both of those coming together for action?
This is another UNICEF-based effort that we're grateful to, and a fellow named Roger Hart, who in '92 traveled the globe more or less and figured out really what does youth participation look like at 8 levels. And it's a rather carefully thought through process with maybe if you just take a minute to look at sort of the way, these are the top 4 levels of an 8-level ladder. And I think one of the things we often ask people is, does anything surprise you at the 8th level? When you does anything, may I quickly ask, does anything strike you all at this level?
Our youth are running the show.
Yeah. And I think exactly. And then as you look from sort of the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th level, you see sort of that building of developmentally. So it's what we try to have on our minds and strive for. Always
you're trying to reach out to youth, kind of running the show. Mm.
Yeah.
I've just always heard that Minnesota had one of the best school systems in the nation.
Oh, that's nice to hear.
So, I've had friends that live there, family that live there, but I don't know, I just no back end evidence, but would that, if they do have a really high bar and a level of education, would that lead to more success than say a school that's a little bit impoverished? You know what I'm saying?
It's a good question you ask, a little bit like, why does Finland lead the international education charts all the time, right? I think I can say this just based on work in an alternative district. That certainly can be true. I think you're right. And a lot of what makes us maybe ripe ground also for CFCI is just kind of broad-based institutional support and higher education support, advanced degrees in youth development. I would also say that working at this alternative school where, across 2 districts and serving about 10,000 students, kids were sort of fired by their communities for early pregnancy, for involvement in the judicial system. And that's where I saw some of the most promising youth leadership. So I would say both and. It was optimistic. Okay, let's try to do this right. See if I can just go forward. Yes. Okay, I will go quickly through this because I think you have heard a lot of this before. In our early stage 1 work where we were initiating, thank you for sort of leading us to this point, there were these key partnerships that were already in place because of the Youth Congress. So I would say, much like you all, yes, we were fortunate. And as a non-Minnesotan myself, I felt like, oh yeah, of course Minneapolis is going to be a child-friendly city. And I could sort of tick off the things that struck me right away. At the same time, you all know that we're the site where George Floyd was murdered. So not all things are rosy, frankly, in Minneapolis. But I think the strong infrastructure has helped us tremendously. And you can see these, much like you all in the room, Parks and Rec and similar partners were central to our work. I also want to do a shout out for AmeriCorps because some of that baseline data collection, they were super helpful with. And just again, briefly, as sort of we were identified as, initiating and then emerging, I think, as we got more involved with our Youth Congress, as they developed and then conducted some of these interviews. This gives you a little sense of sort of our baseline work. We were fortunate to have some summer programs with available young people at the college and high school level who could also help. And you can see that we tried to involve the very young with parents, and that worked well. And I would say all coalesced around sort of the issue that Christy and I work most directly on, which is really raising awareness. How many of us grew up knowing we had child rights, or perhaps that 196 other countries did anyway? So trying to address that has been central to our work. And then maybe just quickly to mention that we are in phase 2 of this action plan building now, thanks to Eric, who isn't here right now, but was Yvonne's supporter through that, a grad student here. We learned sort of where our strengths and weaknesses were in that first phase. And I think, yeah,
I would not go to that.
Okay.
The link.
Yeah, I won't. I'll keep us going.
The local action.
Yeah.
You can go to that link that's on that YCB.
We can share it with you in another way too. And I think then just to mention a few lessons learned, and you can certainly scan them yourselves. I mean, no surprise, it was powerful to have young people's voices and continues to be. And of course, per Roger Hart, we're trying to get ourselves out of the leadership roles, the availability to travel to you all, that kind of thing. Wouldn't it be great to have some of these, Minnesota youth talking to you today? I think also the advent of Sarah would be so central to us, frankly. We sometimes feel, in fact, we're in the position of sort of looking for another Sarah-like person in Minnesota, and just how valuable that person has been to our efforts. We lost her to the county. And then I think I mentioned the parental involvement, and I think just again, no surprise, but sort of the more we're able to let go of and see in the hands of young people, the more creative the work and powerful the work. Nothing. We'll skip this one. Yeah, you want to say a few things about it though?
I'll just mention the video that, again, you can find on the website, but we won't go to it for ease of the folks that are online. But this one initiative was, kind of on the health front. We acknowledged a lot of the kind of health heroines, in our community, so that we could kind of showcase their work. And so this video actually shows somewhat, even within the health arena, the integrated work that different folks were doing in support of children and families. And so I think this video just really shows, again, some of that. How do you do it, and what's the impact, so that you can start to begin to think about measuring and successes.
Then don't go far, Christy. So this is where also Christy's expertise shines. A little bit about the organization we both support and what resources are there.
So Human Rights Educators USA was actually founded back in 2011, and it was kind of created here because people were also in silos, and we're like, hey, how can educators, and I would say it's both formal and non-formal. It's all the way pre-K through 21, we say, and as well as kind of every, nonprofits and in the community institutions, as well as city. How are you bringing it into your community and thinking about this human rights framework? So Monks, can you see that screen back there? Okay, hopefully. Oh. No, okay. So for those online, if you go to hreusa.org, you can go to the projects area that we have, our Children's Rights Project. And I'll just mention a number of those tools. So we have kind of the campaign So if you're interested in seeing, I think in Massachusetts, the only one that we know that has a city resolution in support of the Convention on the Rights of the Child is Cambridge, but there are models, and up there is the model that we used for our mayor signing on to a resolution in support of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as CFCI. And I think Yvonne actually has modeled it as a template for those resources. We have a library up there online where Yvonne, again, I keep pointing out the amazing Yvonne Vissing, who really is an international advocate and educator for children's rights. She's written numerous books and has had numerous conferences. So we then have been able to create videos, and those are all online from those conferences like this. We'll add this one to the library so that if you are looking for other options of how do you tell the stories, or, through, whether you're working on human trafficking, whether you're working on domestic violence, whether you're working on all these threads, how do you begin to talk about it, and how are others, community members, doing things, so we can kind of learn together, both on the US and global front. Another one of the resources on that kind of screen of resources is our podcast. So we launched our Human Rights Educators podcast called Human Rights Education Now. So we have, I think, 46 different podcasts. Yvonne also was interviewed. So she's out there to learn about children's rights in more depth. But those podcasts, when you're thinking, well, what can really be done? Listening to some stories around how others have been doing this in local communities, at least I find them inspirational, and I think can be brought into either teaching situations, or if you're trying to think about how do you raise the benefits, and encourage others, stakeholders, to get involved. I'll mention, because I think we didn't, Minneapolis has developed kind of an affiliation form. So if there are community members who want to become affiliated, that they can actually come, on board. They kind of apply, like how do they see themselves fitting in? And so then that, I think, is a way of engagement. We're still working on expanding kind of the web and the network in that front. Other resources, we do have the K-12 lesson library online that are wonderful tools. I think we have someone who's working in DEI. And so we have attempted to do some briefs of how does human rights education and learning connect up to the DEI framework, or the social justice framework. That's another one. Democracy, civic education. So you can go and have these just 2-pager briefs. We do have up there as well, a Human Rights Education Now briefs, and one that's on the Convention on the Rights of the Child that we just have, published on the 35th anniversary, that, says, okay, how do you either take your temperature? So back a number of years ago, we created a taking your temperature of your school that integrated the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child into concrete, measurables. And so we've seen that as a good way, both not like, oh, are you doing A+ work and or C, but instead as like first entry, like baseline of discussion. Oh, wow, we can't, we all are a little bit lower in this area. Maybe it's because of excess. I think you'll get some of that with your assessments, and you're doing the wonderful landscape assessment for early childhood. But so there's a lot of tools there, and we can help you navigate if it's hard to see. Do we have our Welsh folks on yet? Not quite.
Well, we told them that we were running a little late, so I suspect that they'll be on.
Okay, perfect.
If you have more information, if you have questions.
Sure, we can feel free to take questions if that makes sense. What was that?
Just came on.
Oh, wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so while Anthony, I think I might throw one resource, because I'm actually working on the revision of this right now with the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. But this is kind of a basic, it's called ABC Teaching for Human Rights. And so it's got simple lessons and we'll be getting it updated so that hopefully that some of the gender equality and climate change, because the last time it was revised was 2004. So there's some newer tools hopefully we will be adding in that regard as well.
Happy World Children's Rights Day to everybody. It's been very busy here today, certainly. You can probably tell I'm actually sat in a primary school at the moment. That's one reason I've had problems with IT. We've got these sort of public protections around using computers in schools, but that's where I am. But a big thank you today to Yvonne, and it was absolutely wonderful to have her over with us in Wales to look at the sorts of things that we've been certainly looking at. What I've done is to put together a brief presentation to explain the way that we in particular have been promoting rights in education and rights-based approaches. So I wanted to begin very quickly by pointing out where Wales is. Every time I talk to international audiences, everyone seems to think we're a bit of England. Well, we're not. We're one of the 4 constituent nations of the United Kingdom. And I've just put that slide up there just to show you where we are. Wales has quite a distinct history compared to other parts of the UK. And some of the things in particular that have been interesting when we've looked at rights implementation are things such as child poverty, which regrettably is quite high in Wales, big public sector employment in Wales, and a reliance on the state in many ways for services. That's had an impact on the context and the type of rights that we've been able to implement, certainly within the education system. But Wales as well has got quite a distinct legislative and policy framework, certainly compared to other parts of the UK. In 1998, for the first time in about 300 years, Wales gained back its own parliament with the passing of the Government of Wales Act. This created a referendum. The people of Wales voted to have a National Assembly, as it was then. It's now called the Senedd or the Senate or Welsh Parliament at the moment. Why does any of this matter for children's rights? Well, it matters quite intently, actually, because some of the initial actions of the National Assembly for Wales, as it was then called, were around promoting children's entitlements. So in the year 2000, some 24 years ago, a strategy called Extending Entitlement was developed that said that adults should provide children with a range of entitlements, very similar to rights, but distinct also. But what we've seen in Wales of our devolved government is a greater movement towards recognising the Convention on the Rights of the Child and implementing it within policy, strategy and law. So in 2004, the Welsh Assembly Government, it was then called, as you can tell, we've had a few changes to our executive and legislature over the past 20 or so years. They implemented, again, a strategy called the Seven Core Aims that sought to bring into effect the Convention on the Rights of the Child when the Assembly, the Welsh Government, were making decisions. And it should be pointed out at this point that the range of powers or competencies that are held by the devolved administration, they're not as great as that which is held in Scotland or in Northern Ireland or actually in Westminster, but there are ample powers for the Welsh Government to make a difference around the lives of children. So, for example, education is a devolved matter for Wales. Social services is a devolved matter. The welfare of children is a devolved matter. And as devolution has escalated in Wales with the Government of Wales Act in 2006, which eventually led to primary lawmaking power, we've seen a greater emphasis on the rights of children and their ability to make a difference, not only in their own lives, but in the lives of others in Wales as well. So I put there 2 examples for you. The Children and Families measure of 2010 suggested in section 12 of that measure, which is a primary law, that children should be able to participate in influencing the way that local or municipal government operates in Wales and their strategies. And we did have a seminal piece of law in 2011. My colleagues in the Observatory were involved in helping to draft this with ministers. The Rights of Children, Young People, Persons Measure. I should say persons, sorry. I would have a slap on my wrist for having peoples there. Young Persons Measure of 2011. What that did was to partially incorporate the UNCRC into Welsh domestic law, and it placed a duty on our ministers in Wales. Whenever they exercise their powers and functions, they have to have due regard to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So in theory, every decision should be child rights proofed, even if it always doesn't follow the Convention in the way we would think so. There is, though, a local context. I wanted to give that broader context because different parts of the UK are operating in slightly different ways when we think about children's rights and the importance that we attach to them. But I think it's also important to talk about local context. Yvonne visited Swansea, and Swansea as a county has been very forward-looking, frankly, in terms of implementing children's rights. In 2013, the Cabinet of Swansea Council proposed a change to their constitutional framework, their policy framework in the council, to embed children's rights. And also, as well, the authority paid for schools to be trained and supported in becoming rights-respecting schools and schools where restorative practices, very much rights-based tools, were implemented. And there was oversight by local politicians who tried to drive the agenda. So it was a really positive time in the county at that point in time. But what it also did was to encourage embedding of children's rights in schools within pedagogical practice, within assessment, within the way children were taught. And there was encouragement also politically for for teachers, governors and school leaders to innovate. So to explore not just standardized or traditional applications of children's rights, but to see where we could do more. And so what you had there was nice rollout of training for school leaders and providers of services, and a big emphasis on whole child, whole convention approaches. I mean, one of the things certainly at the university that we've been encouraging public sector bodies to do is to make sure we do have that whole convention approach, which is advocated within the UNCRC. And I've put some pictures there from the school I'm actually sitting in at the moment as to the sorts of things that have come out of that type of innovation, whole convention approach. On the left-hand side there, you see three of our pupils. One is hidden behind a large vegetable, I think. Children saw the rights of the child as influence in their environmental and eco rights, their ability to be active citizens and responsible citizens. On the right-hand side there, you might be wondering why some of the children are dressed up. This was an application which they'd asked for of an event for children to express their identity and the sorts of things that they believe in. And in the middle there is a picture from an engagement opportunity with the City Council, where children work directly with directors and elected members to give their views on local policy. So you can see we're in very much an active rights environment down here in Swansea. But I wanted to give a distinct example of how we've managed to change things and the positivity that comes out of applying rights, certainly in education. You're probably wondering what on earth is that on the screen. What I've tried to do, and this is actually the school I'm sitting in this particular school, which Yvonne visited, the school has gone beyond a simple rights respecting approach, i.e. saying that rights are important, to embed and to change their policy and practice so that the CRC is something which applies within the everyday life of staff, of the institution, and of children. And so what we've got at the top line there are some key principles that have come from working around what does the Convention on the Rights of the Child mean to educators and to children themselves. And I should say all the processes that I'm going to describe from now on, they're all around co-production. So the pupils working with teachers, head teachers, and with us at the university as a partner as well. So one of the first principles, embedding human rights, recognizing the absolute importance of fundamental human rights. Secondly, cultural awareness, and that was around some of these acronyms. Sorry, when I post the slides, I will note what they all mean. So some of those are the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation, acknowledging the multiple challenges that face families and children in Wales. Next, indicators such as 3 school meals, again about poverty, but again, something which impacts upon the sorts of benefits that children may get and the types of support they may get. There was also a recognition that there needed to be early intervention and prevention processes, not leaving problems fester, but also using rights as an instrument to prevent negative outcomes and to promote pro-social outcomes. And the last big principle there was all about well-being. And certainly in this school, it's been interpreted as restorative practices, restorative approaches, and acknowledging the importance of the community and the community hub, the community supporting and helping itself. And all of these things are held up by pillars. So there's 4 big pillars: restorative practice, respect for not just rights, but for people as children as valuable citizens, the importance of listening, the participation rights, and of support, so interventions where those may be needed. So, for example, if a child is at risk of not attending school, how can we use a rights-based narrative and a rights-based intervention approach to help them? So what's happened of all of this? Well, certainly in a number of schools, there have been quite significant changes in policy and practice. I'm going to focus just on one, and this relates to Blaenau Maes Primary School. And it concerns behaviour in schools. This is something which is not simply a Welsh or English or UK concern, something which is global. What the school was noting was a rise in poor behaviours, inconsistent approaches to behaviour codes, a rise in exclusions as well. And so taking the convention, a lot of work was done to contextualise what does this all look like if we adopt a rights-based approach. And just to give you a few headlines from that, I can bore you senses of lots of data and information. In fact, there's a seminar next Wednesday, if anybody'd like to attend that, to present findings from research on this. What the children did was to create a system based on dragons. And that's not simply because we're in Wales. The school mascot is a dragon, and he's rights-respecting dragon. So the children saw that as a character who was safe and friendly and could help them. And so what you have now is a process where every child starts at every session in school, so morning and afternoon, as a green dragon, neutral. They can move up to purple to be rewarded. There's a pink dragon, pink for think, to give them a little bit of time out, what's going on. And then there's a grey dragon where emotional and family support will be brought in. All of this is couched within restorative practices, within a peer mentoring model where children act as rights ambassadors and support each other, and where teachers work on the basis of a very pro-due process and restorative model within the classrooms. We're now in a revised version of this. We began this process in 2018-19, and each year the children are involved in refining this process. But what actually came out of it, and for me, chatting to Yvonne, I hope some of these outcomes are, and processual outcomes anyway, are of use to you. Within the school, and we've now expanded this into neighbouring schools, there was a tiered child-focused policy, which was about keeping children in school, acknowledging their needs and helping and supporting them, not merely in the classroom, but as individuals. There was enhanced engagement between school governors, members of the school board, pupils, school leaders, parents and carers, all brought into this. So again, I mentioned whole convention, almost a whole family approach as well. There was fiscal reorganisation within schools where the governing body of the school invested in training for pupils and staff, moved resources around, so there's greater emphasis on supporting families and understanding family needs as well as children's needs, certainly within a rights context, and promoting participation in problem solving around all of that. Pupil engagement in the design of the policy is embedded. We have annual reviews, which actually take place at Swansea University, where the pupils have been taught research skills. They lead this, and these are pupils from the age of 10 under. So they're actually really fantastic researchers themselves. And what we've also done is to balance out a little more within the school the importance of academic engagement, but protecting welfare and well-being. There's a nice balance. That actually accords pretty well as well with the approach taken by the Welsh Government. We have, in the last few years, had legislation around introducing Welsh curricula. What's all this done? Let me give you some headline outcomes. In terms of behaviour in the school, through monitoring, what we have seen is a significant improvement in school behaviour. There's been consistent application of rights-based charters and of fair and consistent approaches to behaviour. And behaviour that doesn't punish, but behaviour that provides support. In terms of school exclusions, in the school where I'm sitting now, school exclusions have been 0 for 2 years. In our partner schools, they've also dropped down, and they're either in 0 or very low numbers. In terms of academic attainment, that has increased. So in terms of some of the core subject indicators, foundation phase indicators, these have gone up. And also as well, there's been greater engagement by pupils in lessons themselves and academic learning. Sorry, as the head teacher popping in there. So there's been a number of really positive outcomes. Some of these have been quite transformational within the school. I wanted, though, not to just give you my view on all of this, but some quotes from the children who took part. And some of these, to me, are really powerful things that using the tool of rights, what we've done is to help empower children to understand their lives and their needs. So in that first quote, we've had children their emotional intelligence has increased quite considerably. They understand why we need to have support and how the process can help them understand challenges and to resolve them. One of my favorite quotes on that page is the last one. Is a young girl in the school who got on to Pink for Think twice, and she was really disappointed, but she felt she could be fabulous afterwards, and she was. The children consistently understood the process and understand the process, and they get to be framers as well and architects of that process. That's part of their Article 12 rights. So where are we going next with all of this? Because I'm mindful I don't want to talk for too long in case people want to ask me questions. Well, there are implications that, you know, as we're going through this process of embedding this, not just in this particular school, but in other schools, there are processes of reflection. And the key reflections that we collectively have come to are these. First of all, there's a real importance in contextualizing human rights. Particularly in the United Kingdom at the moment, there is a very negative, at times, political rhetoric around fundamental human rights and children's rights. And actually what we're seeing through data and through action in schools is the incredible power, the transformative power of those rights. Why would you not want to have a fundamental threshold of rights and the empowerment of our future citizens, the current citizens, but future leaders as well in our communities? There was a resource issue. And certainly, you know, within the university, we're looking at designing toolkits to support teachers, not just in the schools we work with, but more broadly across Wales, and becoming a repository of data so we can help people understand data benchmarks and the way we can do self-evaluation. There has been a shift in the role of teaching staff and pupils, certainly one which is far more dialogical and accountable, actually, between both pupils and teachers. In terms of voice, that's been absolutely optimized. And for me personally, helping to lead the research process around that. One of my greatest joys is actually talking to school councils, rights ambassadors, and the children who are peer mentors and who simply are in school, who understand this process. They tell us, this is what we need. This is what's happening. You know, it might be in a local environment, but it might be in terms of school needs, might be my voice isn't getting heard, and how to resolve some of those issues. There's also a recognition that some of this takes time. I mentioned earlier that we began this process in 2018, 2019, in that school year. We're now in 2024, 25. And as I mentioned earlier, we've got 0 exclusions. Absolutely incredible change within the school environment, but it takes a little bit of time. But there are some key milestones that we can identify in place of that. And the last thing for us, certainly within Swansea University, is the importance of sharing research evidence. I've started that with Yvonne, and as she mentioned earlier, we are going to be part of a project with you guys over in Salem and also with a university in Texas to try and share the knowledge that we have. We may not be getting everything right. Let me just say that as well. I don't come from a position of entitlement or privilege. What we're doing seems to work for our area. But it also seems to me that there is a fantastic opportunity here for us to share what's happening, to learn from other places, and where possible, you know, particularly on today of all days, to share the importance and to mainstream children's rights wherever we can. So I suppose, if that's helpful, Yvonne, if anybody has any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I've also got my contact details here. Obviously, I'll make these slides available. And please, if you've got any questions around what I've said today, please do ask. And we're always willing to share what we're doing, certainly in the City and County of Swansea and at Swansea University.
Oh, thank you so much, Anthony. Do you have questions? This is your opportunity outside of sending an email.
I'm curious what the rights ambassadors do. If you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, her question is, what do rights ambassadors in the schools do?
Yep, no problem at all. There's a few things they do. The rights ambassadors normally are appointed in year 6. So these are children who are 9 or 10, and they will have been involved in rights-based activities throughout their entire time at the school. What they do is to take a champion role in relation to specific rights. So I'll give you a good example. When we're doing things around the behaviour policy, we've been looking at attendance policy as well. We have the communication ambassadors in the school. And part of their role is to liaise between the university, between the head teacher, and between pupils. So what they do is to organise, they might do research sessions, they may do surveys. That's just one sort of example. We've got others then, eco-ambassadors. The school has quite significant grounds. It's a poor area, but we've got really good grounds. So they help to work with form teachers to organise ecological activities, events to raise awareness of eco issues. So what they do is to champion their particular rights, and they work as a team together. Again, I mentioned again the whole convention approach, that each article of the convention is not abandoned. The children take the lead. They also link back to the governing body, to the school board, to challenge. So if the school board is not doing certain things, they say to them, why aren't you doing it? And perhaps this is what you should be doing.
Amazing.
Another question.
How did the team get buy-in from the schools, whether it's from teachers, school administration? Because it's a lot of different things that are coming from the either municipal or other levels. And yes, the young people are leading a lot of the work, but what did that work look like to get buy-in from the educators in each of the buildings to make sure that the kids continue to lead and that they change, that they make productive change based on what the youth are needing?
Her question was on how did they get the community buy-in?
That's a really, really good question. And there's a number of answers, a number of levels to it. There is, as I mentioned earlier, the Welsh policy framework. There's the legislative framework. So in Wales, for example, as a result of the curriculum laws that were passed here in 2021, the Convention on the Rights of the Child must be taught in schools, and it must feature within the curriculum in every school in Wales. But that's taken us time to get that inserted. Prior to that, what we've had is, I suppose you might call it activism. The Observatory, certainly on the rights of the child, academics, we've been working with a range of agencies and partnerships to try and promote the benefits of understanding the convention and applying it. And through direct research with this school and other schools, including secondary schools here, what we've done is to help train pupils and administrators and leaders in schools to show them the benefits of doing these sorts of methodologies and these sort of paradigm shifts, frankly, in schools. I would as well. I mean, I'm a great believer in being honest. I never put rosy tinted specs on all of this. We haven't always been successful, and even the city council, when it offered funding for every school to become a rights respecting school, some schools didn't immediately take that up. I think what has got easier over time is we're building an evidence base to show how simply respecting children's rights and engaging with them as partners for change has important attendance, attainment, and developmental outcomes. So what we're doing is to build that evidence base to make the case. But we are supported by municipal authorities, and we are supported by the devolved government in this.
I have a follow-up question within the same realm of how did you work with families who have different perspectives from what their children are recommending for their own well-being?
So
that
how
again
did
is another really good question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Yvonne. That's an absolutely fantastic question. I have to say, so far we haven't had significant problems. Part of the reason that we haven't is that we've sought to mainstream rights from what we would call reception age. So let me give you a practical example. In this particular school, we have children coming in from the age of 3. So they come from 3 up until 10 years old. The rights of the child starts to be taught down at the age of 3 upwards. And it features within documentation, within briefings to parents. It's mainstream through teaching practice in school. So parents very quickly become familiar with what we mean when we talk about the rights of the child. You know, initially, I think what we've had to do is to actually put into context what these rights are. Not that they're frightening rights. Your child is suddenly going to want to divorce you and run away and do something else. That's silly. But I mean, what we've said to them is actually these are about fundamental things that children need. You know, the right to a good family life. And part of that right may include the school giving better support to a family. It may mean healthy eating. In this area, we've got high multiple deprivation. The school, for example, provides breakfast clubs to make sure children eat and in the summertime that they have food and water. So what we've done is to be very pragmatic in many ways with explaining what these rights actually mean. They're about fundamental services, fundamental respect, and actually the development of that child. And I haven't yet met a parent who said, I'd want my child to flourish and succeed. And I think that's the sort of, I suppose that's the sort of philosophy in many ways that we take with these rights, not simply rights on a bit of paper being a legal treaty, but actually being rights that improve and potentially enhance the rights, the lives of those young people who get to enjoy them.
Thank you.
Another question, and then we'll move on to Lee Patterson. Thank you.
So with that, speaking about the parents, do you find that the parents already have a pretty good understanding of what child rights are or the CRC, or are they learning it for the first time as their children are exposed to it?
If I'm really honest with you, it's a mixed bag, but it weighs towards the first point. It's actually one of the interesting debates we're having in Wales at the moment. Part of the 2011 measure on the rights of children and young persons says that as per the CRC, there should be awareness raising of those rights with adults, particularly adult decision makers. And of course, that involves families. What we have found is that generally, many parents don't fully understand the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Some don't know what it is. So there's been some work that we've done to provide training for parents as well, awareness raising. I mean, one of the things we have at the university is the Children's Legal Centre Wales. I'm one of the joint academic leads for that. So that in concert with the observatory, for example, we provide user-friendly material for parents, briefings. We've done work with teachers to make sure that when rights are spoken about, the parents are brought into that conversation. One of the things that's important about restorative practices is that it is entirely dialogical, it's conversational. So it's making sure that parents, as important people in those children's lives, are given resources. Again, I'm not going to make a claim that we suddenly have lots and lots of parents who fully understand the convention, but what we are seeing are many parents who understand key provisions of the convention and why that rights-based approach matters so very much. It's a work in progress of that one, and I think it may be a generational issue. The young people who've been coming through the schools now, they understand their rights and they can apply them. Hopefully in the future, if they then have children and families, that positive ethos of being a rights bearer will flow through as well.
All right, one more.
How do you, so with the youth that you're involving in these discussions, how do you ensure that you have a broad representation of youth who maybe don't often speak up, or kids who can't speak for themselves?
Do you know what? That's a really, really good question. And I'm going to start it with one of my bugbears. There is, in a lot of research, certainly in the UK, what I call prefect syndrome, where a lot of what's looked at in terms of evaluation process focuses on academic achievers. And that's one of the things we've started all of our research by saying we're not doing. One of the beauties of allying an understanding of children's rights and their application with restorative practices is that it has helped to give children a voice, particularly, and I'll give you some concrete examples, particularly children, for example, who are refugees who've come into school, whose first language may not be English, but who have made friends and sometimes need support from those friends. So we've had mentoring processes that help them to get heard and to create a variety of mechanisms for them to get heard. We've had individuals who may have additional learning needs, who may not be traditional in their conversational ability, they may be far more graphical. And so what we've been able to do again within these processes, which are based more on sharing and emotions and a sense of experience, that the mechanisms have been able to, the methods have changed. What we have done is to move the direction of conversation around participation, decision-making away from committees and councils and fora towards a much more authentic, real-life understanding of what happens there. Our experience of doing a range of participative projects is that when we adopt different methodologies, children really want to get involved. And in fact, those who are often denied their voice want and need to be heard more. I think that's one of the duties, one of the rights of based, it reflects on us that we have to change our methods to enable children to be heard. And I would say as well, sorry, in schools, if children are quiet and not participating, that is noted. And part of this methodology around the behaviour code is we have family support officers, emotional support officers. They will, in a kind and sensitive manner, say, is everything okay? Is there a reason perhaps the child doesn't want to participate and get involved?
Anthony, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day of celebrating to talk to us here in Salem, Massachusetts. As we transition and hear about what else Wales is doing, I want to thank you for sharing the idea with our folks here about how a community culture matters. It filters down to what happens at the school and the family level. And so human rights education is absolutely imperative. And that your schools are treating children not as objects, but as participants in society. When I visited your school, all of the children have a role, that they are not objects, they are participants, they're learning agency, and they learn that they matter with everything they say and do. And your teachers are trained in how to do this well. Good intention does not always indicate good action. And so this idea of training adults how to do human rights for children emboldens themselves. Everybody benefits. It takes nothing away from adults to give children rights. In fact, it benefits them by doing so. And as we transition, I would like to remind the community here that you have given them a very good offer, and Lee Patterson's going to do the same thing in terms of you're offering to work with us. You're offering to teach us, to role model, to be our partners. Senator Lovely is already committed to trying to develop an alliance between Massachusetts and Wales. And so with this, we want to make sure that people here in this room know that if you want to be change agents, you've got a friend and partner here with his hand out, offering to help you. You have to take the hand. He's not going to do it for you. You have to ask for it, and he's here ready, willing, and able to help. And so thank you so much, Anthony. And thank you, Lee, for coming to talk to us.
Hello, thank you. Can you hear me, Yvonne?
Yes.
Great.
Eric, can I see him? We're all good. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you very much for inviting. I'm just going to see if I can share my screen. Let's fingers crossed.
Wonderful. And so Lee Patterson has been in charge of developing the first CFCI in Wales. And he's in Cardiff, and he has a national view of it, and he goes all around the world telling people about it. And he just told me that he'd been to China, and you were teaching there's almost 200 CFCIs in China. Okay, if China can do it, you think we could do it here in Massachusetts. All right, so thank you so much for talking with us and sharing.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Can you see my screen, Yvonne? Is everything fine?
Yes, beautiful.
That's great. Okay. So thank you. As Yvonne said, my name's Lee Patterson. I'm based in Wales, just 2.5 hours west of London. Really good that my colleague has set the scene politically and geographically. So without further ado, I'll move on and just talk a little bit about Cardiff's journey to being the first UNICEF recognized child-friendly city in the UK. So in the UK, it's slightly different to some other states. UNICEF run it slightly differently. But broadly, I want to talk about our journey that has been supported by UNICEF. But you can do this work with or without UNICEF. But I think the support of UNICEF gives some added value. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that later on if I've got time. So the journey you can see on the screen started in 2017, early 2018. But I think it's really important to put some context to this. So colleagues of mine, senior colleagues in Cardiff in the local authority, in local government, wouldn't mind me saying that between 2013 and 16, Cardiff was in a different place with its children's services and its education services, really in quite a challenging position. And we were looking outwards as a city, as a community, very much, I guess, learning very similar to you are currently, what other communities were doing to make the improvements that Cardiff needed to make to improve the lives of children and young people through children's services, education, and broadly. Having seen a sample and an example of UNICEF's Child Friendly City work, the city set out to find a little bit more about it, which is where I became involved. After doing some research, we were invited to put an expression of interest in to be the first city in the UK. So even though the Child Friendly City Communities and Initiative has been run for many, many years across the globe, it hadn't been run in the UK at that point. So we were the first city to be invited into this space, to be the first city to be working in the UK context. And the journey you can see in front of you started for 2018. Discovery, which is a period of engaging, listening, looking at data, actually choosing what you would like to try to work on, because you can't solve everything. Hopefully my talk will be quite sort of practical. We need to get things out of these programs. They can't be doing lip service or being a veneer. They really have to make a difference and be impactful. So we wanted to make sure that we knew what we wanted to change and how we were going to go about changing it. And we wanted to communicate that to everybody, including children, young people and their families. Then we needed to get on, be busy, roll our sleeves up and actually do some delivery, do the action, get on with it. And then at that point, possibly UNICEF would recognize us for all of the hard work that we put in. So that's the journey starting in 2018. And to do that, the way that we actually went public facing and made a commitment was we published a strategy, as you can see on the screen. So Child Friendly City strategy was published in 2018, setting out clear goals of what we were going to achieve. This slide, just briefly, is used quite often in public health spheres, a whole systems approach. But I think it's really useful in terms of where does the child or the family sit in the context of the systems that work around them. It's quite easy just to forget about all of the impacts that all of our processes and environments can actually have on the child. So we find this really useful just to remind ourselves right the way through to sort of the cultural norms and ideologies, the values, the myths, the assumptions, and sometimes the stereotypical mindsets, right the way down through our policy framework, the physical environment, our blue and green infrastructure, right the way down to our social environment, to the individuals that we're trying to sort of consider and improve the outcome. So a whole systems approach is really pertinent to the work that we're trying to think about in this context of my talk. So for Cardiff, we had the wonderful experience of having a global pandemic. So it was slightly longer for us. We were hoping we were going to sort of receive the recognition for all our work slightly earlier, but it was delayed because we were very busy reacting in a child-friendly way to a pandemic. And we delivered across these 6 areas of working. The bottom 3 that you can see in yellow are set out by UNICEF. They say you have to have a rights respecting culture, leadership and communication. And then the 3 areas that my city, Cardiff, chose to work on was to take a rights-based approach to our family services, to our health services and to education. And we came about that through our discovery phase. I touched briefly on it in my earlier slide, where we did a lot of listening. We worked with adults, stakeholders, professionals, senior politicians, and we listened to children, young people, and we looked at the data. And these are the 3 areas that we chose. So we could go into the detail, but this is about the high level of what does it look like if you consider children's rights and embed it into the work in local and wider governments. So I'll touch briefly on a few of these. So in Cardiff, we looked at the cultural element, and we knew that we needed to make sure that our workforce was knowledgeable and confident when it came to children's rights in their role, whether that's because you're running waste management systems, education systems, maybe you're a local politician. We needed to have a suite of training. So we embarked on training thousands of people across many years in various ways. Some of it was small digital interactions where it was mandatory children's rights modules. Sometimes it was a deeper dive, a cumulative 3, 4, 5 hours worth of work over a period of time. Then we worked specifically with our elected officials to make sure that they understood what it required for them. They could ask questions. It wasn't an exposing thing. It was a positive interaction where people went away better informed, more confident and skilled, if they were working in their constituencies, in their communities, or in their policy development work or voting on policies and manifesto changes that they were working on. And then also we developed a culture which we wanted people to see. We wanted it to be visceral across communities and in the city. So we run a suite of children and young people's festivals, celebrating their achievements, giving them opportunities to come and learn new skills, perform and have fun family time. And that was for children, families and young people, sort of the teenage years as well. So we ran 3 or 4 years of festivals and we're still planning the one for 2025. In terms of leadership, we made sure that we have strategic participation programs where the adults making decisions were connected with children and young people, that we had child's rights impact assessments. So when we were developing a strategy, a policy or a plan, that not only we were considering equalities impact assessments, which are a legal requirement, we were asking policy makers and policy developers to think about the impacts on children's rights and to formally put those into a framework so they could be considered when they're developing these pieces of work. We also established the Children's Rights Team, which I'm very proud to lead on, which help with the advocacy, the coordination and the policy development. And sometimes we actually do direct work with children, young people and communities. And of course, we have a strategic vision that's clearly set out, which means that we can be held accountable and we can be transparent about what we're doing. In terms of communication, we had a large communication plan which needed to speak to all of the audiences, and it's very similar to what you're thinking now. Who do we need to be involved? Who are the stakeholders? And that's children and young people. We needed bespoke pieces of work to make sure we were communicating with them. And of course, their families and the decision makers, the people that were running local government and working in local government, and those people living in the communities that we're serving. And that sometimes that involved social media and a specific website, so people knew where to go for updates regularly. So again, I'm not going to touch too much on these because we spent many years, but I'll pick out a few highlights and some of the thematic badges that we worked on. The family and belonging. We wanted to address one of the biggest things that families told us in our listening exercise at the beginning of our journey. We knew that lots of people, families, were getting themselves into a position where they needed support, that they were in crisis, or their families were breaking down. And when we listened to what they were saying and when we looked at the data, they were ending up spending a lot of time in between services, spending far too much time just waiting to get the right service. So what we established over a period of 18 months from 2018 into 2020 was one place where people could go and get just a gateway into all of the services the city were able to. And that's an email, a telephone number, and they were immediately listened to and triaged and connected with the right service at the right time. And now I'm pleased to say that we have over 95% positive feedback that they received the right service at the right time. Our corporate parenting strategy sets out exactly how we look after and respect the rights of children who are not able to live with their family but taken into the care of the local authority. And this new strategy was built around the voice of those children. They told us exactly what they wanted and their needs and their experiences, and we built a strategy responding to each of their key requirements. In health, there's a whole suite of work, and in fact, happy World Children's Day. I just came from a health event celebrating World Children's Day 2024, where they actually published a new strategy for babies, children and young people. So this work continues. But the work in health, we looked at particular vulnerabilities, A&E and safeguarding for 16 and 17-year-olds. After receiving training, people look through a different lens. So this is important, going back to my first slide. So when people become empowered with knowledge and confidence and skills and go back into their service area or their place of work, they actually start to look through a different lens. And our colleagues in A&E realized that there were different protocols for 16 and 17-year-olds who quite often were choosing to go into the adult department rather than the pediatric department. And there was improvements, an opportunity to improve safeguarding and protect them when they were going into that 16 and 17-year-old group of people. The other thing that we did was we established a youth health board, which sits along the executive adult version. And so the young people help to develop the policies and the frameworks and advocate for children in the quite substantial area local health board. Moving briefly on to education, we look through the lens of vulnerability. So my colleague from Wales, Anthony, has already talked about the Rights Respecting Schools programme. I'm pleased to say that we've embedded the work so far over 5 years, where we have over 85% of children who now in Cardiff who now attend a school that's active in the Rights Respecting Schools Award. And I recognise lots of the indicators of success that Anthony has mentioned. We looked at specific vulnerable groups. So those children that weren't able to receive, for whatever reason, education in a school setting, we did specific policy development work. We ensured that the voice of those pupils were inherent in all of the processes, right the way from a school making referral in to the quality of the education that they receive. We even trained them up to be inspectors, to go out and inspect education providers and make recommendations, and required an improvement plan based on those requirements. So we did a suite of work with asylum seekers who were coming into the country. They were newly, and at that point, unfortunately, they weren't allowed, because of the National Foreign Office, they weren't allowed a school place at that point until they were processed. Well, because we advocated for a rights-based approach, and we talked about the safeguarding arrangements and the fact that particularly in and around the COVID period, and there were such significant delays, that we felt the best place for them was in school. And due to a negotiated peace through rights-based agenda, we're pleased to say that asylum seekers were able to receive school placing and were being seen by professionals and probably safer and happier and educated as a result. So that's a whirlwind tour of some of our thematic badges. That's been a number of years' work. You can see on the screen here, and I won't read them out, but we had to have evidence. We have to have evidence of impact. Is this working? What are children and young people experiencing in their day-to-day lives? Well, you can see we've got positive reports on the screen, that people are feeling that there's cohesion, that they feel respected, that adults listen to them, that they're part of a system which makes sure that they're thought of, that intrinsically they are being respected and their rights are being respected. And also we had to ensure that the workforce was knowledgeable and confident. And you can see here that our senior leaders reported having adequate knowledge around children's rights, that the staff feel comfortable talking to children about their rights, right the way through to the statements that you can see on the right-hand side of my screen, which was a snapshot we did as part of an evidence gathering system, which we'll do again in 2024 and 25, where we asked them to rank a series of statements around their lived experiences. And you can see that, and I'm pleased to say that incrementally they all went up. But the main thing is that they have a positive experience by growing up in our city. So I guess the big question is, what are the benefits? What are the practical benefits of taking a child's rights approach into running local governments and in a local context? Well, from our experience of being just over 5 years in, we hear and see a common language, a rights-based language, which beforehand people simply weren't. It wasn't in their vernacular. It wasn't in their sort of language at all. But there is a common shorthand that are used across directorates. That could be from waste management to sustainability teams to education, children's services, and planning. That's very useful, and it's reassuring when people are seeing senior leaders using a language which is also being used operationally across teams and service areas and in communities. We have staff that are knowledgeable and confident, and they report that they're feeling better placed to be able to respond to the needs of children and young people. And remember, all of this is about improving the outcomes for children and young people. Better use of resources. I think this probably sits comfortably with lots of people who are facing challenges of ever diminishing resources, complex needs. The resources can be better targeted. They're more measured because we know what we're trying to achieve, because we listen to children and young people. We built it into our frameworks and our decision making and our policies. We can manage the allocation of those resources. And if we build in quality assurance processes where we ask children and young people, was that effective? Did it get you to where you needed to? Have you had improved outcomes as a result of our interactions with you, whether that be in communities and schools, hubs, libraries, wherever it is that services are being delivered? Then we know that we can make those changes and just those small tweaks and incrementally and aggregated over time, that can have significant savings and be much more efficient and impactful. It's child-led. It meets some of our statutory duties. Now, obviously, it's contextual. So in Wales, it's slightly different to England, and in the UK, it'll be slightly different to the United States, obviously. But there will be statutory duties, legal, policy, and political, that will, be met by delivering a rights-based approach. And it's about making sure that we dovetail up all of those responsibilities and delivering them in a meaningful and sustainable way. But by taking children's rights and embedding them in the way that we're advocating, it definitely goes a long way as duty bearers and policymakers and political leaders. For me, one of the biggest things is, and I've worked with children and young people, having the privilege of serving them for nearly 35 years, it never seeks to surprise me that if I sit down and listen to 100 children, and then I sit down in a community setting and 100 people over the age of 50, and they're both talking about things that either they want to improve or that makes them angry, at least 60, 70% of the things are the same. They want things that are better services that meets their needs. They want safety. They want better lighting. They want people to listen to them when they're angry. They want to be able to move around the city in a safe way. And actually, independent mobility for older people is quite often very similar to those younger children who maybe need support of others. They can't cross the road as quick as they can. They might want to spend more time sitting and dwelling. So the needs of children quite often are the same needs of our older generations. So building in the needs of children and young people into our environments, into our planning structures, into our policies, into our service design will quite often meet more than the needs of children and young people. And the other thing, the really, really important thing is a clear statement of intent. So to work to improve children's lives broadly in an accessible way is a real accessible visual thing that people can connect with. It's a call to action. It's shared goals. Very rarely do you come across people that don't want to improve the lives of children and young people in their communities. They might have different ways about going about it. They might have certain culture and values, but generally everybody wants the best for children and young people. And making a clear statement of intent as a community, as a local government, with a shared goal and a call to action is usually positively received. So in short, child-friendly cities in its broadest sense of embedding children's rights is positive, it's visible, it's impactful, and it should be collaborative. It should make sure that children and young people and their families feel connected and a sense of belonging, and they're able to flourish, which to me sounds like a great place to grow up. So I'll stop sharing, and maybe there's some questions, but I know you're overrunning, so I appreciate your time.
Oh, you're worth waiting for. So, questions for Lee? This is your opportunity to get expert opinion from someone who's been there, done that, and done it successfully.
Lee, I'm wondering if you can tell us, since you were kind of the project lead, or I'm not sure what your exact title is, can you tell us who were the people that were in those first conversations with you really wanted to work with and get on board in the early stages?
Yeah, so I think that's an important question. So who do you want in your circle of sphere of influence? I talk to young people around. And initially, it was politically driven. So the politicians knew that we had to get better, as I said, between 2013 and 16. So it was politically driven. Senior politicians looked outwards and said, this looks like a really interesting way of addressing some of our challenges. When it then became apparent that we had a coordinating group, who did we want in that group? We wanted a mixture of people that could approve and authorize and people that can do. And we also wanted very quickly to realize where we wanted to have the impact. because as I say, you cannot make a community perfect. We have to choose, where do we implement a child's rights approach? And for us, it was health, education, and family. It could have easily been planning, community safety, urban planning and design, sustainability, equal and included, addressing inequalities. So as soon as we identified through listening and looking at data where we wanted impact, we wanted a mixture of decision makers and people that can really sign off and improve the policy and the decision making, and people that can roll their sleeves up, work directly with children and young people, or actually be responsible for the service change in communities. So a mixture.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious, in full transparency, I'm not super familiar with Wales and the government, but I'm curious, you know, a little bit about, you know, areas where maybe the city had worked to provide resources that weren't available otherwise, or where there were restraints and systems. So I'm thinking about like housing and mental health challenges are very real for us here, and they're larger systems that have some challenges to them. Did you find that like the city itself, you found ways to provide additional services in those areas, or how did you work with kind of like the larger systems with that?
I think I caught most of that. I think one of the biggest things that so what we had to do the work that I've just outlined without a lot of additional money. So I think that's probably fair to say. I think we probably use the existing resources slightly better than we have done in the past, but we also measure things differently. We measure things with different outcomes. So, for example, I'll use something that I'm not responsible for, and apologies if it doesn't really answer your question, but I'll start to meander towards it. If we were to want less children who are obese, we used to measure weight, BMI, the number of hours exercising. We've started to think about things in a much more holistic way. And when we talk to children around why you might not be moving around in a healthier way, people have been telling us that our road system is too busy, that our parents are too suffocating and they don't like us taking risks and playing outside. That actually our school is in a place where we can't walk to it because it's too dangerous, or it's not there's no places for us to store bikes, or it's too expensive to go to our local sports center or gym, or they don't do things for us as girls. All of a sudden, these are barriers. And so we started to look at listening to children and young people is absolutely pivotal. Their lived experiences will tell us where we can make those small incremental differences, maybe realign some of our resources rather than find new ones. Policy development. So at the moment, for example, we now have a lot more school children walking to school, which is much healthier for the city. Traffic is far less. Children are happier and healthier. They're more alert and they're going to school. And some of the reasons we've done that is because we've given them permission to build bike stores. We've given children skills and confidence by bike training, so they're able to do it. And we've actually changed the policy around 35 of our schools, where you're not allowed to take a car in the immediate area between 8:15 and 9, and between 2:45 and 3:30. So it's safer, and people are forced to sort of out of their cars a little bit, but there's lots of positive way. My point being that we have to do things slightly differently without additional money, and the way that the approach is by listening. And I said this to Yvonne, that if we were a private sector firm and we had a target audience who were going to buy our services or our product, we would very much listen to what their needs are, why they're not buying it, when they would buy more, how much they would buy if we were to change certain things. And I think we need to be thinking much more of them as clients and service users and what their experiences are, because they tell us how you can effectively save money and reinvest it elsewhere. So I don't know if that really answered your question, because it dropped off the signal. Please tell me if it didn't go towards it. We didn't have new money, but we did business slightly differently.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Other questions? Yes.
I'm curious with various social services and assistance programs available in the city, how do you organize that information so it's accessible to people so they know what's out there? Is that like a physical space that you create like within the city where people can go to get assistance for various needs? Or is it something web-based? Is it mailings to houses? You know, how do you organize all that information? There's so many different nonprofits and social services and different things available. It's hard to know what can help.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think you're referring to something we call Early Help and Family Gateway, the one point of entry for families that need support and help and information. It is a mixture. It doesn't tend to, you don't tend to walk into call centers or into physical hubs much these days, but you can actually speak to somebody very quickly with one telephone number, or you can send an email and then people will call you back. Its operations include a number of languages and is accessible in a number of ways. So you can choose to do web chats, you can speak to individuals, you can communicate in a variety of ways to get that first initial point of contact. Once that assessment is done, there are a suite of teams and services that sit behind, so that you triage very much like you go into A&E, and if you've got a head injury or an ankle, twisted ankle, you get different sort of weights and different help. At that point, then you have physical teams. So you might have teams of health visitors that might come out. You might have teams of physiotherapists. You might have a team of mentors, youth mentors, because maybe your young person just needs a trusted adult to talk about things. It may be that mum or dad might have substance issues, or there's some debt counseling that need to go on, and there's some financial challenges. So there's different ways of providing those services by local authority, local government services, and the wider network of, as you said, NGOs, third sector partners, and charitable organizations. But it's generally through a telephone or an email interaction in the first instance. And then there's that one-to-one contact, and then you triage to the right place. It was a very impressive piece of work to be done in 18 months. We had over 80% of referrals that were going to the wrong place before we started. And now 95% of people say that they're in the right place, but not only that, they got it at the right time and it had a positive impact. So it was a really, very, transformational, really.
Yes, another question.
I'm wondering how you got the school buy-in, the individual school buy-in, whether it's city-based, so that then all of a sudden all of them have to do what the city's saying, or at least in Minnesota, I don't know, or Minneapolis, I'm not sure if it's the same as Salem. Those are kind of separate. They kind of function with the school board system and your city. And so that's the question.
Yeah. So we have a different director of education now, but the ethos is still the same. Schools are autonomous. We obviously have a quality assurance and a coordinating role as a city government. However, what we do know is that schools want the best for their pupils, definitely. Every school wants the best for their pupils. But also, we know they're very competitive. So by actually getting and supporting those proactive schools that would like to take children's rights and make them a reality and embed them into their community using the rights respecting schools approach, we supported them initially. And then we provided other schools the opportunity to learn about what that looked like and what the success looks like and what the impact of that work was. And quite quickly, head teachers and governing bodies of schools said, how come we're not involved in this? That sounds like a real purposeful, productive way of educating and supporting and caring for our children. And so the momentum builds. We also listened to schools who told us two things quite clearly. We don't have a lot of money, but we'd like to do the work that's been set out. and we need help and support to understand the best way of doing it. So as a city, the one thing that was in our gift was to negotiate with UNICEF. If we were to represent over 128 schools, let's negotiate, let's go into business. What discount are you going to give us, rather than 128 schools going to you and you build them directly if there's a requirement? So we negotiated a discount, and then we fully funded the opportunity to register and be part of that work, get free assessments so you can progress, and free training. So that was the balance between showcasing what can be achieved and the benefits and some of the outcomes that my colleague just spoke about, but reducing some of the barriers for schools. And then there's a movement, there's a rights-based movement. They can see the benefits for their community, for the children, for the teaching staff. This is something that wasn't spoken about, but the teaching staff in the schools that I visited over the last few years have all said that there's a sense of well-being within the staff. There's a sense of respect. There's a different peer-to-peer relationship with pupils, but also pupils to teachers and teachers to teachers. And so it's just sharing that and amplifying those opportunities and removing some of the barriers.
Can I have one follow-up? So then UNICEF, it sounds like, was then providing the training, some training mechanisms for that 128. Is that right? And then, so I worked with Iceland a bit. So they have a similar, rights respecting schools model and the FCI. And then there's also Amnesty International that is going into schools. So have you worked with other nonprofits that are doing human rights education work to also support or outside resources, I guess, to help support those schools?
Yep, no, I'm responsible for work with UNICEF, and that's twofold. So that's the UNICEF Child Friendly City work, which we see as an umbrella sort of profile piece of work. And underneath that, we've got two other pieces of work, which are also with UNICEF, which is the Rights Respect in Schools program in schools. But they also in the United Kingdom have a baby friendly initiative, which looks at midwifery, health visiting and neonatal work, looking at standards for our babies. And so we're gold standards in that in the local authority. And we use the Rights Respect in Schools work as our education with the child friendly over the top. We do work with a number of NGOs, but not quite in the way that you've described that our colleagues in Iceland do. But we do work, and we do directly commission certain charitable organizations to carry out different elements of our work, particularly with families, children, maybe in communities, not necessarily in schools in the same way.
Another question? Yes.
To piggyback on that a little bit, where did you run into the most resistance, or what were the biggest hurdles in getting this initiative to take root in the community, and how did you address that?
Sorry, was the question, what are the biggest barriers to taking root? Is that correct?
Yeah, in the community. How did you get, spoke about how you got the schools to buy in, but how did you get the community and the government to buy in?
Yeah. So if I answer the community one, do you know, as Yvonne alluded to, I was really pleased to be able to speak in China just a few weeks back, and the Chinese couldn't believe that I stood up and aired our laundry in public, because my half an hour talk consisted of about 15 minutes of what Cardiff didn't do very well, and they couldn't really get their heads around the fact that I was using it as a learning opportunity. But if I can sort of take a similar approach, I really don't think we've cracked the first point of your question. I think even though we've been working with UNICEF since 2018 formally, we set out a clear statement of intent, and UNICEF has recognized years of work. You could stop 100 people on the streets of Cardiff and ask, do you know what Child Friendly Cardiff is? Or did you know that the UNICEF have been working with the city? Or do you know what children's rights are? And I really do think that a lot of people would still say that they weren't aware of it. However, I think there will be examples that people would give if we give them the time to have a further conversation around some of the improvements that they might have seen or experienced with them and their family. whether that be something in their community as tangible as an improvement or additional resources in their local parks, or an improvement in our health facilities, or how they got help when they wanted to. They wouldn't necessarily know explicitly that it was recognized under a child-friendly city banner, that it was children's rights in action that was happening. However, I think some of the messaging is a really important part. The call to action, a movement to say that children and young people are incredibly important, and we value you, and you're central to our thinking, and you're not citizens in waiting, you're citizens now, is a really important nut to crack. And the way that we've gone towards doing that is through clever use of messaging, piggybacking on successes that are already happening, and just explaining how this relates to children's rights, getting people at the very highest level to feel comfortable and knowledgeable talking about children's rights, because there were lots of good work going on, but they weren't necessarily comfortably talking about it, whether you be the mayor, the city leader, senior politicians. So I think it's a mixture of community level activism, getting our community providers, whether that be libraries, hubs, schools, to have collateral or to have things on their website which say children are important, we're a child-friendly city partner. So we have a network of partners where you can have a feather flag outside, you can have banners outside. All of our schools have got banners saying we love children, we love children's rights, it's what we do. And most of all, it's about people doing things where we treat children and young people with dignity and respect in everything that we do. And we feel comfortable talking overtly about that in whatever role you're in, whether you're a senior politician, you're putting garbage in the bin, whether you're opening up a community venue for the sports teams to use it. We're all part of that team. And I think that is an ongoing war of attrition, because we've got so many competing agendas, so many sort of myths and misinformation out there, that we need to fill in those voids with positive, real examples of where we really do believe that children and young people are central to our thinking, and give them examples and tell them they're fantastic.
Thank you. Any more questions before we lose this opportunity? Although I'm sure you would welcome emails and phone calls.
Of course.
Just for
Yeah. More than welcome.
Oh, one more.
I'll ask one more, just since no one else raised their hand. And that is, you talked about kind of your welcoming, I'm not sure how, when asylums, or maybe this was the previous. Okay, so new language, yes. How are you handling, new arrivals with, different languages? Because at least in Iceland, you know, there's the Icelandic being kind of the primary language, and then all these different newcomers having their own languages, and how do you integrate them in healthy ways into schools, whether you're mainstreaming or through the child-friendly and families?
Yeah, we're very lucky in Wales. So in Wales, our mother tongue is actually Welsh, so we don't speak English as our sort of national language. So everything has to be published, documents, public signs, road signs, everything has to be bilingual. So we're quite used to sort of moving in between languages. But not only that, Cardiff was historically a very big old port town. We had a very big coal industry. So during the Victorian period in the 1800s, Cardiff thrived, and our port brought people from all over the world. So we're actually very diverse. We have something like 78 community languages across our schools and in our communities, and we're very diverse. So I think extra people coming in, maybe with some additional, maybe we'll get up to 80, 90 languages. I think we see it as a bit of a blessing, as it's a challenge, and we can only do so much translation, whether that be providing services or actually written documentation. What we're finding is, linguistically, people are willing to work hard to embed themselves into our community, and that could be not just learning English if English isn't their first language or they're comfortable in it. They're actually offering to learn Welsh as well, which some of our communities don't actually speak Welsh. So they're very proactive, and we see it as a strength and an addition to our diversity. But of course, practically, it can give us some resource implications and some considerations around how we meet, particularly when we get large groups. If there is a displacement of particular groups, whether that be through war-torn or our families in Ukraine, we adapt and we overcome, and we've got policies to reflect that. But thankfully, we have a very diverse community and respect languages.
Well, you have left us with much to think about and to discuss. For us here in Salem right now, we're going to take a break for lunch, and then we're going to go into work groups and try to figure out some of those steps that you've talked about. But as we make this transition, some of the key messages that I think that I've been left with is the importance of changing the narrative. We need to think about things differently. We need to create different paradigms. We need to watch our language and look at how our bias and assumptions have made us incapable of really moving forward. And so if we can start to challenge that, which young people can do by getting that direct data. Your data is impressive. Thinking about how 85–90% of your people are now able to access the resources that they need. Can people here imagine children wanting to go to school and liking it, and the teachers not hating their jobs? We are losing teachers because going into schools now is so difficult, and it's because of the narrative and the cultural climate that we have created. And we could change that. And if we could change that as a community, certainly it would benefit everybody. And as you say, it doesn't have to be directly related to a rights-based word. It's action that matters. And so the fact that you are able to show us a demonstrable path of success is something that I think people here should really listen to and see what kind of partnership that you and the international community who've been doing this for a long time can really provide us. I thank you wholeheartedly for your taking the time on this busy day to inspire us. And I'm sure that I'll be in touch, and I would suspect that others will as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. All the best. Enjoy your break.